for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Brexit Britain. Non-stop breaking news today because the future of the United Kingdom is at stake. In a matter of moments, live on this very show, we will reveal the deal between Great Britain and the European Union. Political Armageddon is incoming. The Tory party could be about to implode, ministers could resign, Northern Ireland could be ruled over by foreign judges, and is it a disgrace that King Charles has been dragged into this political row? But here's an angle that nobody's talking about. This deal could stop the Channel migrant crisis, get us a bumper trade deal with the Americans and get goods moving in Northern Ireland. The fallout from what is about to happen live on this show in the next hour could blow up the government, define Rishi Sunak's career, but most importantly, it will also define our great country's future. Let's get stuck in. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Are you worried that Rishi Sunak has sold Britain out? GBViews at gbnews.uk. That's all coming your way shortly, but now it's the headlines with Tamsin.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 3. The Prime Minister and EU Commissioner have finalised a deal on post-Brexit trading arrangements for Northern Ireland. A government source said an agreement had been reached between Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen, who've been holding talks in Windsor. Ms von der Leyen will now go on to meet the King at Windsor Castle. The Prime Minister hopes a deal will win the approval of the Democratic Unionist Party, so power sharing can be restored in Northern Ireland. Former Brexit Secretary David Davis says reaching the deal is good news.
It is a dramatically improved deal. I mean, a massive reduction of the impact of European law on Northern Ireland. And the European Court of Justice only has say over things which really affect exports to the European Union. That seems reasonable. A veto arrangement. Not even a majority veto, a veto arrangement which could be triggered by a number of members of the Assembly of Northern Ireland. So a whole series of improvements.
The energy regulator has reduced the cap on the amount energy suppliers can charge customers, but bills are still expected to rise. Ofgem has announced a cap on the amount households pay for gas and electricity will drop by almost £1,000 from the 1st of April. However, customers are likely to pay 20% more on their annual bills, as the government's additional support only partially protects them. This means the average home will likely pay £500 more a year. The Labour leader says he wants to bring the UK back to being a rock of economic stability. Sir Keir Starmer used a speech in London to set out his economic vision, saying Britain needs certainty but also change in order to achieve that goal. He said his real ambition is growth from the grassroots.
A new model for economic growth, growth from the grassroots, where wealth is created everywhere, by everyone, for everyone. Raise our collective sights beyond the day-to-day, deliver the long-term solutions our country needs. So here in this document, the mission: secure the highest sustained growth in the G7, a measurable goal.
Flags are flying at half-mast in Westminster following the death of former House of Commons Speaker Baroness Betty Boothroyd. She became the first woman to be elected as Speaker in April 1992, staying on in the role until October 2000. Current Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle called her an inspiring woman and an inspirational politician, describing her as one of a kind. The Baroness was 93. The Food Minister, Mark Spencer, has summoned supermarket bosses to explain what they're doing to get shelves stocked again amid a fresh produce shortage. The lack of fruit and vegetables is expected to last up to 4 weeks as bad weather continues to affect the supply of stock imported to the UK. Several supermarkets, including Tesco, Aldi, Asda and Morrisons, have introduced customer limits on certain items, including tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers. Lidl has become the latest supermarket to introduce buyer limits. Half of people in the UK have reported cutting back on food shopping in recent weeks as price rises take their toll on households. An Office for National Statistics survey shows around a tenth of adults say they often or sometimes ran out of food and could not afford to buy more in the past month. 13% said they'd cut down meal sizes because there wasn't enough money for food. Grocery price inflation surged to 16.7% in January, adding up to £800 to annual shopping bills. The legal age to get married has been raised to 18 to help protect vulnerable children. 16 and 17-year-olds can no longer wed or enter a civil partnership in England or Wales from today, even with parental consent. The law change means it's now a crime to exploit children by forcing them into an arranged marriage. The Girls Not Brides Coalition has called it a huge victory. The Northern Lights seen across the UK on Sunday could appear again this evening. That's according to the Met Office. Members of the public captured the lights in Scotland, North Wales, Cambridgeshire and Shropshire, but there was also a rare sighting in southern England as the aurora lights reached as far as Kent and Cornwall. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Patrick.
This is a historic day for the UK, and GB News is the place for the very, very best coverage. After what seems like forever, there is finally agreement between the UK and the EU over the thorny issue of Northern Ireland. But loads of unanswered questions, lots of mystery, and frankly, the government may well even implode over this. Rishi Sunak and the EU Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen have struck a deal that will end Brexit deadlock, or so they think. The Prime Minister arrived in Windsor shortly before 1 o'clock ahead of a meeting with von der Leyen. Now, to get the very latest, I'm joined by GB News' political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom, thank you very, very much. First and foremost, how on earth can they say they've got a deal done when MPs won't even get to vote on this, will they?
They won't. Under the terms of the EU Withdrawal Act, the Prime Minister has the power to sort of do these supplementary deals, these amendments. They don't actually need a formal agreement of the House of Commons. This is within the gift of the executive. That being said, there's sort of what must be done de facto and what must be done de jure. And it does seem that de facto there will need to be some sort of agreement of MPs. It would be very difficult for the Prime Minister not to get that sort of nod along from Parliament. So whilst he doesn't need a vote in Parliament, I think it's more likely than not that he will give Parliament a vote. The question is, when will that come? All the indications at the moment will be it won't be this week. MPs need the time to look over the terms of this deal that is not yet made public, let's not forget. It won't be public until after this press conference that we're expecting in around 25 minutes' time.
Yes, exactly that. I just want to remind all of our listeners and our viewers we will be going live to, frankly, one of the more historic press conferences in this country's rich and proud history. I mean, it really could define the future, it will define the future of the United Kingdom as we know it. So make sure you keep yourselves locked in because we're going to that as soon as they come out onto those podiums. But, Tom, it's all very well and good, Rishi Sunak grandstanding with Ursula von der Leyen, but the reality is, if he doesn't get the ERG on side or the DUP on side either, I mean, there could be mass implosion as a result of this.
Yes, the crucial point here isn't whether or not this deal can get passed through a vote of Parliament. It's whether or not Rishi Sunak's premiership can survive significant dissent within Parliament. It's not the deal that's at risk, it's Rishi Sunak and his position. If this goes badly, if the DUP kick off about this, if the ERG follow suit, Rishi Sunak's position as Prime Minister may well be brought into question. If someone like Boris Johnson says this is a sellout, this is a bad deal, then things get very, very difficult for Rishi Sunak. On the other hand, if this lands well, if Rishi Sunak has achieved what looked like it was unachievable for months on end, then he could well start to turn around his dire position in the polls.
Yeah, just to give people a little bit of a fact file, as we understand them at the minute, as with any big breaking news story, the facts can actually change. So here we go. Reasons to sign, potentially, and be happy with this deal. It could lead to a better deal with the USA, of course. That would be absolutely massive. It could lead to a trade war with the EU if we do not get this deal over the line. It could help relations with France, and that's an issue we're going to touch on shortly, which is whether or not it actually, perversely, could help stop the small boats crisis. Could it mean that goods can travel through to Northern Ireland a lot more easily than they are at the minute, helping the economy there? Will Britain still have a say when it comes to being able to set, frankly, things like VAT and state aid in Northern Ireland? What would it mean for the role of foreign judges, foreign courts in Northern Ireland? That, I think, would be a hard red line. So lots to discuss here as and when that detail drops. But, Tom, Rishi Sunak will be going live on this very channel very shortly. How long after that do you think it will take for the reactions, either negative or positive, resignations potentially, to hit the floor?
I don't think we will see resignations at this point, mostly because what we've just had is a cabinet meeting, met at 2:30, met for around an hour, and that was when the cabinet signed off this deal. So cabinet ministers have been briefed now on what this deal entails. The media and the general public will get sight of this deal after this press conference, and there is a briefing for journalists after that as well. The Prime Minister will then, of course, have to stand up at the House of Commons at that dispatch box at 6:30 p.m. And that's a really important point, because that is the first time that the Prime Minister will not be in control of events. Frankly, what we're going to see now, this press conference, that sort of has been sort of stage managed by Number 10. The meeting with von der Leyen, stage managed. The cabinet meeting, that's all been organised by Number 10. But then when he turns up in Parliament, when he has to answer questions from MPs who've had a few hours to look over the detail, when he has to answer from the DUP or from his own backbenchers, that's when we will really see the test of his mettle over this issue.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, and we really are the place to watch it. Tom, I know you're going to stay exactly where you are, but I would quite like to go to Stormont ASAP, actually go to, some would say, the epicentre of where this deal really counts, where it's really kicking off, and go to GB News' Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. Doogie, thank you so much. What's the mood music like there? Because that place has been awful quiet behind you there for a very long time. Are we going to see a break in the deadlock?
Well, it all depends on what happens in the next few hours, as Tom was saying. The initial reaction here was, well, it was no horses bolted, no one ran, and they looked at it and thought, OK, green lanes, red lanes. But the detail on that will be what is in the red lanes. Is manufacturing in the red lanes? Is farming in the red lanes? If that is in the red lanes, that could be a red line, quite basically. Anything coming into the green lanes, it's good news for Northern Ireland, because it means goods coming from the UK into Northern Ireland can travel freely. All they have to do is produce an invoice, and that will show them as a trusted trader coming in from the UK to Northern Ireland, and that will help, of course, as we've talked about, choice on goods coming in here and bring the prices down once more, as opposed to what has been happening. But the real stuff, as we've been talking about, is around the European Courts of Justice. Where will they stand? That is things like state aid, but it is also things such as tariffs on steel. We're paying 25% on British steel coming in here. We also will be held inside European Courts of Justice, or European rights on stuff such as white goods. So because Britain doesn't make any white goods, it will not charge any tax on it coming in, but they are made inside the EU and they'll charge on it. So therefore, all those things have to be looked at and discussed, and see what the divergence is between the UK and Northern Ireland, and of course what role this place will have in the and override some of those particular issues. And in doing that, that means that there will be a divergence between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, if that is possible, and that could cause problems with nationalist parties who really want to see an alignment, an economic alignment of the whole of Ireland and keep them inside the EU.
Yeah, and Doogie, just to really break it down for people, I mean, if the DUP decide that they're not happy with this at all, what happens?
Well, if the DUP aren't happy with this, the chances are the Tory backbenchers could revolt, and that could start something quite bad for Rishi Sunak. Now, of course, he's already been offered, on the 13th of January, Keir Starmer offered him political cover, but that it's not a good look for a British Prime Minister, or especially a Tory British Prime Minister, to have to cross the floor and get the backing of the Labour government to push anything through. But as Thomas said, he doesn't have to go for that vote. Heath was the last one to do that, to bring them into the EU, and that didn't go so well at the time either. So all this is to play with. Everything is a moving part, and we'll know what happens during the press conference when we start to see what the very detail of this is.
Absolutely. Look, Doogie, thank you very, very much. Doogie Beattie there, our Northern Ireland reporter, just at the epicentre there of Northern Irish power. Emails coming in thick and fast on this, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I haven't got time to go to those just yet, people, because it's a fast-moving picture, but get them coming in. Yes, important to emphasise, as yet, the devil is in the detail, and we don't know the detail. But let's get some reaction to this latest news. You can see it at the bottom of your screen there. Breaking news, and it's going to be breaking news throughout the course of this show. Brexit deal done. And we're all wondering how the Democratic Unionist Party will react to all of this. And frankly, as well, the ERG, Tory ministers, etc. This is D-Day, not just for the deal, but also for Rishi Sunak and potentially the future of the Conservative Party as we know it. Former Brexit Secretary David Davis has advised the DUP to carefully consider this deal, but keep in mind the political wrangling that's gone into it. Let's just have a listen.
What I would say to the DUP is take your time, test it carefully against each of your 7 considerations, but understand, that the government has gone out on a big limb in order to meet your 7 considerations, and I think come up with something which sounds very reasonable. And what's more, done it in a way which has left us in a good relationship with the European Union. I mean, we've been sort of hostile manoeuvring for the last several years. I remember it too well. But it seems to have been that they've arrived at an arrangement which is mutually beneficial. Now, we've got to hear the details, of course, but my view is this is better than anybody previously has achieved.
OK, well, that's David Davis there, and he will be giving a lot more reaction on Jacob Rees-Mogg's brand new show on GB News. That is tonight from 8 p.m. You don't want to miss it. I mean, he couldn't have really picked a better day to launch his show, could he? Because he's been, for many people, Mr. Brexit, and he will be giving his hot take on this particular deal. And we'll know a lot more detail by then. Just to fill you in on where we're up to and what you've got coming live on this show very shortly, in about 15 minutes' time, we are going to be having an absolutely historic press conference that will shape the future of the nation as we know it, and potentially Rishi Sunak's future, the Tory party, etc. That's going to take place between Rishi Sunak, Ursula von der Leyen. We will have a few questions off the back of it as well, and we'll be reacting to that live because there are so many unanswered questions at the moment, ladies and gentlemen. Will it lead to Tory backbench revolt? What will it mean for the DUP? Actually, will it be a good thing? Are you all a bit sick of it? And there is that angle to it as well, to be honest with you. Are you all a bit sick of having conversations like this now? Would you be willing to pretty much take anything that's written on a piece of paper, get it signed, get the conversation moved on? There are loads of different angles to this as well, because if it does mean that Northern Ireland essentially can get out of deadlock, that could be good politically, it could be good economically. But right here at home as well, get a load of this. Another angle is that it could open up a trade deal with the United States. That would be great. And as something I'm going to talk about shortly, it might even lead to stopping the Channel migrant crisis. I'll tell you why in a bit. But the big one, of course, will this deal break that deadlock? The Prime Minister will have to get it past his own MPs and the DUP following threats of ministerial resignations. And to discuss this, I am joined now by author and journalist Eamon Malley and fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy, it's Catherine McBride. Thank you very much. Catherine, I will start with you. What do you make of what we know about this so far? Do you think that Rishi Sunak here is potentially signing his political death warrant, or is this a great thing?
I do think that he could be signing his political death warrant if he tries to force this through without proper scrutiny and without the support of the Conservative Party. if he has to rely on Labor votes to get this through, then he's probably got real problems. But I would like to talk about trade, because I think you just suggested that we might get a trade deal with the US from this. And I think you've got to look at whether there's any requirement.
Oh, okay, I'll come back.
Because that is our big fear in any kind of food trade.
Yes, well,
sorry,
you've cut out there. I'll tell you what, I'll just park you there for a second. I'll come back to you, Catherine. I'll go over to Eamon now for a second. Eamon, really, same question to you. We are about to take a press conference live in about 10 minutes' time. I mean, do you think that this could be almost the end of Rishi Sunak, or actually will it be the making of him?
Well, it's anybody's question. The bottom line is, will Rishi Sunak's deal pass the DUP test? Nobody knows that yet. And from what I understand is, the Democratic Unionist Party is not going to respond in a hurry. Now, I would expect the following. There's one voice, one person at the heart of the Democratic Unionist Party, a former barrister who worked for David Trimble, one of the baby barristers in the Good Friday Agreement talks. And then I think he will be critical, and he will read every single line of that and read between the lines before any DUP decision will be taken. Furthermore, I would not rule out the re-involvement of the former party leader, Peter Robinson, one of the wisest, shrewdest old foxes in Democratic Unionist parties historically. And I would imagine that Peter Robinson will run his eye across everything before any reference or any confirmation will come from Jeffrey Donaldson. I think that's how it is. And you must remember, very few of these guys had any real serious experience of in-depth negotiations. They were not at the table when the deal, the Good Friday Agreement, was eventually done. And that, I think, is a shortcoming in the Democratic Unionist Party decision-making at this time. They were not there. They didn't experience the nuances of such deal-making at that time.
OK, all right. Catherine, I think we've got you back now. Now, one of the things is, and it's just an unfortunate fact in where we are at this particular moment in the day, is we do not know all of the detail yet, but we do know the optics of it. And we do know that Rishi Sunak clearly is in no rush to put this to MPs, to elected officials. And I've got a feeling that might backfire, Catherine.
I'm sure it will backfire. I have no doubt in that, because depending on what's on the deal, but the whole premise of trying to protect the EU from food that could potentially go across the border into Northern Ireland and then get to Dublin and then get shipped back to the continent is completely without any foundation. When you look at what they're actually trading, it's really just about stopping cheap food getting into Europe that they haven't taxed, basically. And unfortunately, if they do sign up to dynamic alignment with EU SPS rules, then that could have real implications for the CPTPP trade deal that's being negotiated at the moment, and also for any potential trade deal with the US. So I don't think that this is going to help us do a US deal, regardless of what Biden might have said about Ireland. I don't think he's looked into the actual regulations that the EU insists upon. So I think that you've really got to look at the detail carefully, because though we think it's just about Northern Ireland, it might end up backfiring on the whole UK, which was originally the whole intent of setting this up, of course, was to try and lock the UK into the EU.
OK. Eamon, should the ERG and the DUP be careful what they wish for? I can sense that the public are now very fatigued with anything Brexit related. And I've said it before, today is a massive day, so it doesn't apply today. But there have been 3 words in the English language for a long time now that can send people to sleep. And those words are Northern Ireland Protocol. And I think people want something done about this. If the Tory party decides to split itself up over this, it'll just lead to Rishi Sunak's downfall, a general election and a Labour government, won't it? So should they see the bigger picture, Eamon?
Yes, of course. But the bottom line is, Jeffrey Donaldson, the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, is in a big dilemma. He's no longer the leader of the biggest party in Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin is the biggest party now in Northern Ireland. Michelle O'Neill is in the wings waiting to become First Minister. Big decisions for Jeffrey Donaldson. He said last week, big moment. This is a big moment for his leadership. He can't mess this up. Now, if Rishi Sunak has bounced or is about to bounce the Democratic Unionist Party, I think that could be a very dangerous course. And I think ought to be inconceivable that Mr. Sunak could bring forward any deal without being absolutely certain that the Democratic Unionist Party is going to back it. And we have no evidence or no confirmation that there has been in-depth negotiations per se with Jeffrey Donaldson and his aides on this whole issue. So it could be a very dangerous ambush for Rishi Sunak and for Jeffrey Donaldson.
OK. Look, both of you, what I'm going to do is now just ask you quite a short question. We're awaiting the start of this press conference. There's another angle I want to get stuck into this with my next guest. But, look, we don't know all of the info yet at all, or really any of it. But I'm just going to ask you to, in your gut, Catherine, in your gut, do you think this is going to be a good thing for Rishi Sunak or not? Pretty much a yes or no from you.
Well, I think that he might have solved the economic problems, but he won't have solved the governmental problems, and that is the issue. They need the ECJ out completely. They need any EU law that's still hanging around Northern Ireland has to go. You know, that it's the United Kingdom, and even putting border posts in the Irish Sea as a permanent fixture is a really bad sign. This is not someone who's a unionist. So, sorry, that's more than yes and no.
That's spot on, because you've identified another key angle to this, which is, frankly, that it does appear from the info that we're getting at the minute, which might change in a few minutes' time, but it is that Northern Ireland is not going to be free of, quotes-unquote, foreign judges in a foreign land, which I know is a massive red line. Look, Eamon, same to you, quite quickly here, really. Just in your gut, do you sense that this is going to be a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think the Democratic Unionist Party will be irreparably damaged if they concede any, even a modicum, iota of ECJ rule of government in Northern Ireland. Nigel Dodds, a former MP, House of Lords member at the moment, he specifically was so absolute on this. There can be no ECJ influence in Northern Ireland, period. If the Democratic Unionist Party give way on that, it'll be remarkable.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Trouble is brewing. Both of you, thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Appreciate your time. Eamon Malley there, author and journalist. And also, as well, we had Catherine McBride, who's a fellow at the Centre of Brexit Policy. Right, look, there's an angle that, as far as I can tell, no other media outlet appears to be really going at, and I think it's interesting. Today's developments could have a massive impact on the UK's attempts to tackle the small boats crisis. I'm going to talk to you about that in a little bit, actually. But the theory is that if we appease the EU and the EU are happy with it, then when we have a Franco-UK meeting, so Emmanuel Macron and Rishi Sunak, you know, both of the some of the world's shortest leaders there, they go and shake hands and they say, OK, how well we're both doing. It might actually mean that the French are more inclined to do more to stop the small boats coming across the channel. I'm going to delve into that shortly, because would that change your mind on this? Would you be more inclined to be happier with a deal that, all right, still left quite prominent jurisdiction over Northern Ireland to foreign judges in a foreign court, if it meant that the small boats crisis in the Channel was actually reined in? But before that, Tom Harwood's still with me here. Tom, thank you very much. Our political reporter, Tom Harwood. Any latest noises coming out from you? I know you've been glued to... Oh, in fact, give me 1 second here, ladies and gentlemen. I believe what we're seeing on the screen now is the plinth. So this is the situation in Windsor. So very shortly, matter of moments, Rishi Sunak, Ursula von der Leyen, they're going to take to that stage there. For our radio listeners, of course, the EU flag and, of course, the Union flag there, side by side. I'm sure that will wind quite a few people up. But, Tom, yeah, the idea of the ECJ being involved and having a say over Northern Ireland, frankly, makes it seem to a lot of people like this isn't really a proper deal. It's not sovereign independence, is it?
Well, there are lots of different ways in which you can look at this, because the question is, to what extent will EU law still apply in Northern Ireland? If you were to enter some sort of dual regime where both UK and EU law were to apply, and the ECJ adjudicates the EU bit, but you can have UK-regulated goods that aren't adjudicated by the ECJ, you could sort of imagine a dual system that wouldn't necessarily upset either community. However, if there is still the level of oversight that there is right now, now, that of course would be a more tricky thing to square. What some people have been saying in terms of the run-up to this deal, and I have to stress, we haven't yet seen this text. We won't see this text until after this press conference. But some of these things to watch out for are how the particulars are implemented. So we've talked a lot about the red and green lanes, the ease of goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Well, the question that many people will be asking is, how green is this green lane? Is it really no checks at all? Is that a complete abolition? Or is it fewer checks? And how red is the red lane? And what goods are in either one? So there are some big questions on the detail here that I think is the reason why we're not going to see so many snap judgments.
Absolutely. And again, yes, this ease of enforcement when it comes to the green lane, it could be there's some kind of trusted trader scheme. So we see the large suppliers, so just off the top of my head now, your Marks and Spencers, your John Lewis's, etc., all of these people, they go straight into a trusted trader scheme, pretty much no checks. But what about your small suppliers, you know? Wasn't Brexit supposed to help the little man? Wasn't it supposed to be helping your average common man and woman on the street, maybe setting up a small business? Well, they've been clobbered with corporation taxes left, right and centre. It's been very difficult for people to get businesses off the ground, and now they're hoping that they might be able to qualify for some trusted trader scheme. Will that be more red tape to go through? That will be an interesting one to watch. What I suspect that Rishi Sunak will try to do is emphasise the concessions the European Union has made here. Now, again, important to say, we will get this detail shortly live here on GB News, but it's understood the EU has agreed to get rid of 97% of the single market rules that apply to those products passing through green lanes, which I think could be interesting, couldn't it? And Rishi Sunak, I suspect, Tom, is about to try and sell it as a, look what I've got from the EU, they've blinked.
Yes, it is going to... Well, I think one of the facts that we have to acknowledge here is it does seem that there have been some EU concessions. No matter what is agreed, there will be some greater ease of trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain than there was before. I suppose the question is, how much further have the EU gone? But whatever they've done, there will have been movement. There will have been some movement. But it's interesting to look at the wider political considerations here, of course, because the big question is that when this detail is published, what are the political ramifications for Rishi Sunak? How has he sold this? Will people acknowledge that this is something that has advanced the status of Northern Ireland? Or frankly, is this all a lot of spin that hasn't achieved very much? Well, big questions to answer.
Exactly that. And look, this press conference is due to start. It's due to start any minute. But before it does, I want to put a bit of a play out to our viewers and listeners. Get in touch. Already loads of you got sell out Sunak in the inbox. It's a sellout. Well, we don't know yet, do we? There's quite a few people as well who are saying they don't know. We're going live to Windsor now. Let's find out together. Rishi Sunak, Ursula von der Leyen. Let's take it.
Good afternoon. All our thoughts are with Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell and his family after last week's abhorrent shooting in Omagh. A man of extraordinary courage, his first thought was to protect the children he had been coaching. President von der Leyen and I stand united with the people and leaders of all communities across Northern Ireland. Those trying to drag us back into the past will never succeed. This afternoon, I welcomed President von der Leyen to Windsor to continue our discussions about the Northern Ireland Protocol. I'm pleased to report that we have now made a decisive breakthrough. Together, we have changed the original protocol and are today announcing the new Windsor framework. Today's agreement delivers smooth-flowing trade within the whole United Kingdom, protects Northern Ireland's place in our union, and safeguards sovereignty for the people of Northern Ireland. Now, these negotiations have not always been easy, but I'd like to pay an enormous personal tribute to Ursula for her vision in recognising the possibility of a new way forward. And to my colleagues, the Foreign and Northern Ireland Secretaries, for their steadfast leadership. The United Kingdom and European Union may have had our differences in the past, but we are allies, trading partners and friends, something that we've seen clearly in the past year as we joined with others to support Ukraine. This is the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. For a quarter of a century, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement has endured because, at its heart, is respect for the aspirations and identity of all communities. Today's agreement is about preserving that delicate balance and charting a new way forward for the people of Northern Ireland. I am standing here today because I believe we have found ways to end the uncertainty and challenge for the people of Northern Ireland. We have taken 3 big steps forward. First, today's agreement delivers the smooth flow of trade within the United Kingdom. Goods destined for Northern Ireland will travel through a new green lane with a separate red lane for goods at risk of moving onto the EU. In the green lane, burdensome customs bureaucracy will be scrapped. It means food retailers like supermarkets, restaurants and wholesalers will no longer need hundreds of certificates for every lorry. And we will end the situation where food made to UK rules could not be sent to and sold in Northern Ireland. This means that if food is available on supermarket shelves in Great Britain, then it will be available on supermarket shelves in Northern Ireland. And unlike the protocol, today's agreement means people sending parcels to friends or family or doing their shopping online will have to complete no customs paperwork. This means we have removed any sense of a border in the Irish Sea. Second, we have protected Northern Ireland's place in the Union. We've amended the legal text of the protocol to ensure we can make critical VAT and excise changes for the whole of the UK. For example, on alcohol duty, meaning our reforms to cut the cost of a pint in the pub will now apply in Northern Ireland. The same quintessentially British products like trees, plants and seed potatoes will again be available in Northern Ireland's garden centres. Onerous travels on pet requirements have been removed. And today's agreement also delivers a landmark settlement on medicines. From now on, drugs approved for use by the UK's medicines regulator will be automatically available in every pharmacy and hospital in Northern Ireland. Third, today's agreement safeguards sovereignty for the people of Northern Ireland. The only EU law that applies in Northern Ireland under the framework is the minimum necessary to avoid a hard border with Ireland and allow Northern Irish businesses to continue accessing the EU market. But I know that many people in Northern Ireland are worried about being subject to changes in EU goods laws. To address that, today's agreement introduces a new Stormont break. Many had called for Stormont to have a say over these laws. But the Stormont break goes further and means that Stormont can in fact stop them from applying in Northern Ireland. This will establish a clear process through which the democratically elected Assembly can pull an emergency brake for changes to EU goods rules that would have significant and lasting effects on everyday lives. If the brake is pulled, the UK government will have a veto. This gives the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland a powerful new safeguard based on cross-community consent. I believe the Windsor framework marks a turning point for the people of Northern Ireland. It fixes the practical problems they face. It preserves the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Now, of course, parties will want to consider the agreement in detail, a process that will need time and care. Today's agreement is written in the language of laws and treaties. But really, it's about much more than that. It's about stability in Northern Ireland. It's about real people and real businesses. It's about showing that our union that has lasted for centuries can and will endure. And it's about breaking down the barriers between us, setting aside the arguments that for too long have divided us, and remembering that fellow feeling that defines us, this family of nations, this united kingdom. Thank you. Ursula.
Good afternoon. Prime Minister Rishi. It is an honour and a pleasure to be here in Windsor with you, and it is with a great sense of satisfaction that we stand here together. We are about to deliver on an important commitment we made to each other a few months ago. I remember our first discussions when we saw eye to eye on how to support our Ukrainian friends. And I was encouraged by our trustful and strong cooperation on this crucial geostrategic issue. But I also remember how the two of us were honest with each other about the difficulties in our bilateral relationship. And it was vital to put that on the right footing too. We committed to work hard together to do so. We knew that for us to be able to make the most of the potential of our partnership, solutions were needed for the issues around the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. We knew it was not going to be easy. We knew we needed to listen to each other's concerns very carefully. Above all, we had to listen to the concerns of the people of Northern Ireland. We knew we had to work hard with clear minds and determination, but we also both knew, dear Rishi, that we could do it because we were both genuinely committed to find a practical solution for people and for all communities in Northern Ireland. Today, we can take pride in the fact that we have delivered on that commitment. Because today we have reached an agreement in principle on the Windsor framework. The Windsor framework lays down new arrangements on Ireland, Northern Ireland. This new framework will allow us to begin a new chapter. It provides for long-lasting solutions that both of us are confident will work for all people and businesses in Northern Ireland. Solutions that respond directly to the concerns they have raised. Prime Minister, we worked hard across a wide range of areas. The new arrangements are delivering a comprehensive package so that we can address in a definitive way the issues faced in everyday lives. I will only mention two examples that I find most telling. Indeed, the new Windsor framework will ensure that the same food will be available on supermarket shelves in Northern Ireland as in the rest of the UK. And furthermore, the new Windsor framework will permanently enable all medicines, including novel ones, to be available in Northern Ireland at the same time, under the same conditions across the UK. For this to work, we have agreed on strong safeguards, like IT access, labels and enforcement procedures that will protect the integrity of the European Union's single market. The new Windsor framework respects and protects our respective markets and our respective legitimate interests. And most importantly, it protects the very hard-earned peace gains of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement for the people of Northern Ireland and across the island of Ireland. Violence has no place in our society. I condemn wholeheartedly the shooting of the PSNI officer in Northern Ireland last week, and my thoughts are with the officer and his family and friends. This year will mark the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, an important milestone of the historic peace process. The new Windsor framework is here to benefit people in Northern Ireland and support all communities celebrating peace on the island of Ireland. And this is why I believe we can now open a new chapter in our partnership. A stronger EU-UK relationship, standing as close partners, shoulder to shoulder, now and in the future. Many thanks.
Thank you, Ursula. We have time for some questions from the media. Could I start with the BBC?
Thank you. Chris Mason, BBC News. If the Democratic Unionist Party don't go back into government in Northern Ireland after all of this, does it ultimately amount to a failure? Question to both of you.
Well, Chris, I think today marks a turning point for Northern Ireland. I've spent a lot of time listening to communities there, businesses there, the unionist community as well, understanding their concerns, and I believe that today's framework addresses them. It ensures that we can move goods freely around our UK internal market, it protects Northern Ireland's place in the Union, and it safeguards sovereignty for Northern Ireland's people. But I also recognise that parties and communities across Northern Ireland will want to take the time to consider the detail of what we're announcing today, and we should give them the time and the space to do that, and I fully respect that. But I believe that what we have achieved today is a real breakthrough. And it's now for the parties to consider that and decide themselves how to take it forward and build a better future for people in Northern Ireland.
I think it's historic what we have agreed today and what we have achieved. And indeed, a lot will happen. The establishing of the green lane, for example, and the red lane for goods, the reducing of an amount of paperwork, reduce customs and checks on the ground, sharing customs data, information in real time. All these will drastically facilitate when implemented. It's a big step forward. And I think what is exceptional is that we managed to find an agreement for solutions that will protect our respective single markets. And this is a lot, and therefore I really want to thank for the excellent cooperation, and I really want to thank our teams also for all the time they've invested, all the knowledge. The result is extraordinary.
I'd echo what Ursula said about thanking our teams. And actually, Chris, just building on what Ursula said, often we focus on the politics of situations, Westminster and all the rest of it, but this is about the people of Northern Ireland, about the communities, about the businesses there, and what's best for them. And I believe that the Windsor framework that we've agreed today really resolves the challenges that had been raised. It resolves all the practical issues on the ground. It puts people in charge of their destiny. That's why it represents such a major breakthrough. And I hope everyone can recognise that and take the time to consider it. But this framework will start making a positive difference to people's lives in Northern Ireland almost immediately. And regardless of all the politics of this, I think that is something that hopefully all of us can recognise and celebrate. Can we turn next to RTE?
Hello, John Carrain from RTE here. The unionists say they want to be treated the same, and it's to both leader. They want to be treated the same as any other part of the UK. However, Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK that shares a land border with the EU. So there will have to be some differences for Northern Ireland compared to the rest of the UK. Do you believe the unionists will accept different treatment? And can you point to how, for instance, the European Court of Justice will have jurisdiction in Northern Ireland?
Do you want me to take that first, Ursula? I'll just echo what I just said, John, actually, about, yes, of course, politics matters, and parties in Northern Ireland, unionist communities, will want to take the time to consider what we've announced today, digest the detail, and we should give them the time and the space to do that. But if you focus on people, on families, on communities, on businesses, I think people will see that the framework we've agreed today delivers significant improvements in almost every aspect of their lives that have seen disruption and challenge from the protocol. And that is something that I think can be celebrated and recognised, and that benefit will start coming very quickly. Now, there are a range of things that I heard when I talked to communities in Northern Ireland, and because of the breadth and the comprehensive nature of this framework, and you heard some of it in my remarks earlier, I think we're addressing all those practical challenges and indeed safeguarding sovereignty as well, and I know that's something that's particularly important to communities in Northern Ireland. With regard to the role of EU law, to recognise that with the consent of people in Northern Ireland has access to the single market, and I think we all collectively share an ambition to avoid, as you say, a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, and that's why there's a role for EU law in Northern Ireland, but that happens with consent, and as a result of the agreements that we've reached today, there is further democratic accountability of that role of EU law with the new Stormont break, which provides a very powerful mechanism for the Stormont institution to use when it has concerns. And I think that is really important part of correcting the democratic deficit that existed and providing reassurance to everyone in Northern Ireland that they are in control of their own destiny.
Yes, indeed, the European Court of Justice is the sole and ultimate arbiter of EU law. That's natural because it's prescribed by the EU legal order. So the ECJ will have the final say on EU law and single market issues. But we have, in this Windsor framework, worked hard on the rules that existed before, not only the ECJ on EU law, but also the arbitration panel on not EU laws. And this includes the new Stormont break, which is based on the petition of concern that comes from the Good Friday Agreement. So we have built on this peace process the next step. We've kind of leveled up or improved the overall mechanism. I think important is in our Windsor framework that we are putting also in place several mechanisms that should avoid having to resort to the Stormont break, which is an emergency mechanism. So extensive consultations with the UK and Northern Ireland stakeholders on new EU laws, but also consultations of the EU by the UK on UK planned regulatory changes. This is important for us. And with view on Ireland, of course, there has always been the full commitment, and there is the full commitment of the European Union to safeguard the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions. No hard border on the island of Ireland, and of course that we fully protect the integrity of the EU single market.
Can I turn next to the Express?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Sam Lister, Daily Express. This has been described by some as a test of your leadership. Are you planning to have a vote on this deal? And if so, how tough are you prepared to be on Boris Johnson and members of the ERG if they decide to oppose it? And I wonder if I could just ask President von der Leyen a question. Can you explain to us why Rishi Sunak's been able to negotiate these concessions when his three predecessors were unable to? Thank you.
So yes, Parliament will have a vote at the appropriate time and that vote will be respected. But as I said earlier, I think it's important that we give everyone the time and the space they need to consider the detail of the framework that we've announced today, because it is comprehensive in nature and that will take time for people to digest. But ultimately, this isn't necessarily about me, it's not about politicians, it's about the people in Northern Ireland. It's about what's best for them. It's about those families, those businesses, and what this framework, what this agreement will do to improve their lives. And I believe that the changes that we have made, the breakthroughs that we have been able to put forward together, will make an enormous difference. We can now say that goods will flow freely, smoothly across the UK internal market, that we've protected Northern Ireland's place in our union, that we've safeguarded sovereignty for Northern Ireland's people. Those are all significant achievements, and that's what we should focus on. And I think all of us know about the stability that is required in Northern Ireland, the delicate balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and how important that is. Today's framework means that that balance is restored, and that's why I think this is a very significant step forward. It marks a turning point for the people of Northern Ireland today, and I very much hope as a result of this they can look forward to a better future.
I think it is very important to take note of the fact that the two of us, when we met for the very first time, we agreed that, I mean, if you look at the huge challenges we are facing together, whether it is the atrocious Russian war in Ukraine or the fight against climate change, we have so much in common. We're fighting for the same values. We're standing on the same side, shoulder by shoulder. And we want the best solution for the people of Northern Ireland in the situation that we have right now. So there was a very constructive attitude from the very beginning to solve problems, to find solutions, practical solutions for everyday life of the people and businesses in Northern Ireland. That's what we've done. And we've jointly developed the solutions. It needed a lot of goodwill and knowledge, and we have jointly agreed on that now. So I'm very happy about the agreement that we found with the Windsor framework.
Right, and lastly, have we got Le Soir?
Chloé Goodenough for the Belgian newspaper Le Soir. Would you say that the trust is back between the UK and the EU? And would you say that this deal would help the UK to participate again to Horizon, the research programme?
You want to start?
Yes, this Windsor framework is good news for scientists and researchers in the European Union and in the UK. Because, of course, the moment we have finished this agreement, so it's an agreement in principle, the moment it's implemented, I am happy to start immediately, right now, the work on an association agreement, which is the precondition to join Horizon Europe. So good news for all those who are working in research and science.
I think I'd also just add to that, there's a range of different areas that we can cooperate productively on, and the President and I started that work when we first met. But if you look at how we've responded to the situation in Ukraine, that's required very close coordination on things like sanctions policy, which the President has led, and we work very closely together on that. Also energy security more broadly, given the interconnected nature of our energy markets. Climate change is another area, and indeed illegal migration. These are all the types of things that we can continue to make good progress on working together to the benefit of all of our communities that we represent. And I look forward to doing that with President von der Leyen as well. Good. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
OK, right, well, we did hear there, didn't we, Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen just outlining some of the basics of this new deal. Very shortly, I'm going to go to Andrew Pearce, of course, GBnews' very own Andrew Pearce, columnist at The Mail. But Tom Harwell's been sitting next to me throughout our political reporter, and he's identified some very key unanswered questions that came out there. Go on.
There are some really important points to watch, and this is why we're not seeing any snap judgments, not from the DUP or the ERG. Firstly, on these green lanes, what goods and products are within them? How deep do they go? We know that sausages are going to be allowed on the shelves of Northern Ireland. Goods on the shelves in GB will be on NI2, but how much further does it go? Then when it comes to customs forms, we're told that people sending gifts or ordering online will not have to fill out any custom forms at all within the United Kingdom. But does that apply to businesses? And if not, why not? And how far? We heard Rishi Sunak use the term, not hundreds of forms for lorries going across. Well, is there a single form? These are some big questions that will be in the text, and particularly when it comes to this idea of VAT. We heard cited that currently some VAT cuts that could be done in the in GB couldn't be done in Northern Ireland because EU law prevents it. Rishi Sunak is now saying his deal will allow those sorts of tax cuts in Northern Ireland. The question is how? Does this deliver actual treaty change with the deal that was previously agreed? And if not, what is the mechanism by which this is enforced? Or is it just a sort of hoping that the EU will go through with it on a gentleman's agreement? Those are some real key questions on the enforceability of the deal and the key points within it. And it's why I don't think we're going to hear real snap judgments for several hours yet.
Yeah, and that's what Rishi Sunak's saying. He's basically saying, look, I want to give everyone involved here the time to digest all of this detail. As we understand it, the full detail is going to emerge on the government website probably in a few minutes' time. We'll have to wait and see. And no doubt the likes of Tom Harwood and other political boffins will be picking it apart left, right and centre. I'm joined now by Andrew Pearce, who is, of course, of this parish right here at GB News. Very lucky to have him. And one of, if not the country's top political columnist and journalist. Andrew, thank you very much. Your initial gut feeling there, Andrew, about whether or not Rishi Sunak has just signed his political death warrant or actually whether or not it's a love letter.
It's much more of a love letter, and it's a big surprise, actually. I've talked to some members of the European Research Group. They are what we call the Brexit Spartans, the real hardliners, and they say if what they're being told is in that deal, then he's done a lot better than expected. Not least, of course, they can veto legislation coming across from the European Union. The problem is, it's the way they've handled it, this government. Clearly, Rishi Sunak's done a good job here, but still, members of the European Research Group, members of the DUP have not seen a copy of the legal text. Why not? Everybody else seems to have seen it, but not the real protagonists and main players. That's why Tom's quite right. There won't be any snap judgments yet because they want to see that. There's talk there's going to be a white paper published at 6:30, but even that isn't the legal text. You want to see the legal text, you can see every word, comma, full stop, because these things are drawn up by lawyers and they can be very clever, and it can be what's not in the text as much as what's in it. But I think Rishi Sunak has done a pretty good deal here. As I say, some of the more critical people on the back benches are saying he's done well. Whether they think he's done what Boris Johnson's reaction, of course, will be very interesting. Liz Truss's too. But the bonhomie between the two was pretty interesting. But again, why have they dragged the king into it? Extraordinary. I mean, there's no way, in my view, that a cosy cup of tea with the king means Ursula von der Leyen is going to say, OK, great, Rishi, you've got your deal. Of course, that's not the case. It's all about using soft power and mood music. But the timing is very odd, because I think one of those teenage scribblers in Number 10 thought, wouldn't it be clever to call it the Windsor Accord or the Windsor Agreement?
Yeah, no, indeed. Look, Andrew, thank you very much. And I do hope that we might get to chat to you again a little bit later on as more unravels. That's Andrew Pearce there, like I said, of this parish, very much so does the show. Wonderful show here on GB News, and is one of the country's top political correspondents and columnists. Look, just a very quick summary. What you've just heard there, which we're all picking through at the minute, is potentially one of the more historic press conferences that this country will ever see. An agreement in principle reached between Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom. And that apparently would appear to be called the Windsor Framework. Similar food, of course, standards that are in the UK available in Northern Ireland. It will mean good news for people who want to send parcels between the two countries. We'll get to set VAT, so to put that into context, the price of a pint can stay the same in the UK as it is in Northern Ireland. We've also got, of course, pet movement, which is good. More importantly, some would argue, is medicines, etc., etc., etc. But loads of unanswered questions, and I'm going to be picking through all of those unanswered questions very shortly, including, believe it or not, a different angle as well. What does this mean for the Channel migrant crisis as well? Would it actually mean that France is more likely to stop the boats? Is it going to get us a better trade deal with the United States of America? I tell you what, it's all to play for, and I'll be here with you very, very shortly after the news headlines from Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, our top story, as you've been hearing on GB News today, a new post-Brexit deal for Northern Ireland has been described as a decisive breakthrough, with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, saying it'll deliver smooth-flowing free trade across the UK while protecting Northern Ireland's sovereignty. Both Rishi Sunak and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the agreement marks a new chapter in the UK and EU's relationship. The Prime Minister says Parliament will have a vote on the deal, and he hopes it'll also win the approval of the Democratic Unionist Party.
It's about showing that our union, that has lasted for centuries, can and will endure. And it's about breaking down the barriers between us, setting aside the arguments that for too long have divided us, and remembering that fellow feeling that defines us. This family of nations, this united kingdom.
Well, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the deal strengthens the relationship.
The new Windsor framework respects and protects our respective markets and our respective legitimate interests. And most importantly, it protects the very hard-earned peace gains of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement for the people of Northern Ireland and across the island of Ireland.
Well, in other news today, the energy regulator has reduced the cap on how much suppliers can charge customers, but bills are still expected to rise. Ofgem has announced the cap on the amount households pay for gas and electricity will drop by almost £1,000 from the 1st of April. However, customers are likely to pay 20% more on their annual bills, as the government's additional support only partially protects them. That means the average household will most likely pay £500 a year more than they did before.
The Labour leader says he wants to bring the UK back to being a rock of economic stability. Sir Keir Starmer used a speech in central London to set out his economic vision, saying Britain needs certainty but also change in order to achieve that goal. He said his real ambition is to have growth from the grassroots.
A new model for economic growth, growth from the grassroots, where wealth is created everywhere, by everyone, for everyone. Raise our collective sights beyond the day-to-day. Deliver the long-term solutions our country needs. So here, in this document, the mission. Secure the highest sustained growth in the G7. A measurable goal.
Now, flags are flying at half-mast in Westminster today following the news that the former House of Commons Speaker, Baroness Betty Boothroyd, has died. She became the first woman to be elected as Speaker of the House in April 1992, staying on in the role until October 2000. Current Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle called her an inspiring woman and an inspirational politician, describing her as one of a kind. The Baroness was 93 years old. The Food Minister, Mark Spencer, has summoned supermarket bosses to explain what they're doing to get shelves stocked again amid a fresh produce shortage. The lack of fruit and vegetables is expected to last up to 4 weeks as bad weather continues to affect the supply of stock imported into the UK. Several supermarkets, including Tesco, Aldi, Asda and Morrisons, have introduced custom limits on certain items, including tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers. Lidl has become the latest supermarket to introduce buyer limits. Well, half of people in the UK have reported cutting back on food shopping in recent weeks as price rises take their toll on households. An Office for National Statistics survey shows around a tenth of adults say they often or sometimes ran out of food and could not afford to buy more in the last month. 13% said they'd cut down on meal sizes because there wasn't enough money for food. And grocery price inflation surged to 16.7% in January, adding up to £800 to annual shopping bills. The legal age at which it's OK to get married has risen to 18 to help protect vulnerable children. 16 and 17-year-olds can no longer wed or enter civil partnerships in England or Wales from today, even with parental consent. The law change means it's now a crime to exploit children by forcing them into an arranged marriage. The Girls Not Brides coalition has called it a huge victory. That's all from me. Back in half an hour.
Wow, well, what a day, ladies and gentlemen. In the past hour, Rishi Sunak announced a decisive breakthrough on post-Brexit trading arrangements with Northern Ireland. Speaking at a press conference, which you heard here live, alongside EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen in Windsor, the PM said, "I'm pleased to report that we now have made a decisive breakthrough and that this new deal is the beginning of a new chapter." But actually, frankly, more questions left unanswered than answered. And again, just moments on, because we're going to be rolling with this all day now, ladies and gentlemen, pretty much. The longer the time goes on since he spoke there, the more questions that there are unanswered. And actually, serious chasms opening up as to whether or not this is Brexit. Is this sovereignty? Tom Harwood joins me now, our political correspondent. Tom, something we identified just in that little news break there, which was actually about the role of the ECJ and, frankly, who is in charge of the laws in Northern Ireland. Is it the EU or is it the people of Northern Ireland?
Well, there's a key point here. Some EU law does still apply in Northern Ireland. This isn't stopping all EU law in Northern Ireland because it keeps that avoiding a hard border on that island. So there is still EU law, and to that extent, because there's EU law, there is still some ECJ oversight. We heard there at the press conference Ursula von der Leyen say the ECJ is the sole arbiter of EU law. But the crucial qualifier here is this, what are they calling it, the Stormont break. The Stormont break, and Ursula von der Leyen said something important, that it's based on the petition of concern within the Good Friday Agreement.
I'm just going to cut in there, Tom, because live images are coming up on our screen at the moment, which will show in a second anyway. Rishi Sunak leaving Windsor. He's called this breakthrough the Windsor framework. If you believe he's just walked out, actually. Rishi Sunak will be on his way now to Downing Street. One would imagine, potentially anyway, because he's going to be giving a statement. It's around 6:30 to MPs. And it's on that issue, Tom. I want to zoom out a little bit here now. And I want to ask you, Tom, do you think, from what we've heard just there, that is Rishi Sunak's almost like political death warrant, or actually could it be some kind of love letter, really? Could this be the making of him?
As things stand, this is better for Rishi Sunak than a lot of people expected. Big qualifier in all of this, yet to see the detail, the particulars with this Stormont break, this ability of Northern Ireland MLAs within the Legislative Assembly there to stop EU law. How powerful is that? If what Ursula von der Leyen said is borne out in the text of this, i.e. if it's based on that petition of concern within the Good Friday Agreement, i.e. that's just 30 MLAs, members of the Legislative Assembly, can stop any law. If that doesn't require cross-community consent, for example, that would be giving the DUP itself a veto power over any EU law within Northern Ireland. That would be a really strong veto. That would be a lot of a democratic sort of accountability mechanism there. But we need to see the detail. Does it require cross-community? Is it only 30 MLAs? These are the questions that are not yet answered. But if it looks like how it's been presented so far, there is no denying this is a big political win for Rishi Sunak.
You know what he's trying to do, really, there, that I thought was quite clever, whether or not people agree with it or not, it is just something he tried to do, which is keep saying this isn't about politics, this isn't about me, this isn't about reading between the lines, the DUP or the ERG or all of those staunch Brexiteers. This is about the people of Northern Ireland. And I was taking some notes on with this. Basically, he was saying that what this deal would do is it'd make it easier for the same food that we've got over here on the quotes-unquote mainland, as it were, to be in the shelves over in Northern Ireland. People wanting to send parcels, just normal people, businesses as well, wanting to send parcels, that will be easier, he says. Talking about VAT control, and he just emphasised, as all politicians do there, what it would mean for the price of a pint. And it means that if he decided to make booze cheaper, the people of Northern Ireland would benefit as well. Things like moving pets between countries. We can see Ursula von der Leyen in Windsor there. Now, actually, another angle on this, which we're going to be talking about later on, is that Ursula von der Leyen is meeting with the King as well, which a lot of people are very, very angry about. In fact, Darren McCaffrey's just popped up on our screens there, our political reporter. We've been trying to get hold of Darren for the last hour, so it would be nice to actually chat to him at some point. But Darren McCaffrey making his way out there with all the other bigwigs and political journalists. We can see quite a few people there. Ursula von der Leyen will be coming out and will be, as well, going to meet the King. And people are saying, why has the King got involved in all of this? But just to return to a couple of the points I was making earlier on there, which is that he's basically trying to emphasise that the deal that he's got at the moment, he thinks will be better for your average common man and woman in Northern Ireland. And I think they're trying to swerve the political consequences out of it, so the DUP, etc. I'm going to go to Northern Ireland now. Why not? It would be remiss of us not to. And Doogie Beattie joins us, our Northern Ireland reporter. He's over in Stormont. Doogie, thank you very, very much. Right, give us the hot take from where you are.
Well, we're waiting now on Michelle O'Neill to come to the microphones behind us, so if she does, you'll be able to cut to that. She's the First Minister in waiting, of course, and the Deputy Leader of Sinn Féin. She is the largest party in Northern Ireland's Assembly here. And when you talk about, and that's exactly what Tom's talking about, that petition of concern, that has been a petition of concern in Northern Ireland for many, many years, because it had to be cross-community and it stopped many things from going through. If that's worked the same way, we could end up with all sorts of legislation bouncing all over the place on the Stormont break, as they call it. We're also looking at, again, Tom has spotted it very well, is what is in the red lanes. What is in the red lane? Is manufacturing in the red lane? Is farming in the red lane? And how will that work with group haulage? Those are the things that we haven't seen the detail in. And if anything on this is going to trip it up, it will be the detail in that. And unionists here are not, they're not talking the deal down at all. The only thing they aren't happy with is they didn't seem to have sight of it before it actually Rishi Sunak announced it. So they're saying, look, we live here, we have to operate here. Why didn't we have a say in what was going on? Because, of course, nationalists have that say with Leo Varadkar in the south, because they are part of the EU 27. So all that has created a bad feeling. It might be a good deal, but it's just been awkward as to how it's been clonked together. But we await to see what the details are, and really, we're not going to see anything here for probably about a week. Did the DUP take this and have a really good look at what's going on, including the unionists?
Yeah, absolutely. Doogie, thank you very much. Doogie Beattie there, GB News' Northern Ireland reporter from Stormont. And that's kind of where we are, ladies and gentlemen. The early mood music about all of this is that Rishi Sunak has potentially done quite a bit better than a lot of people thought. He's given himself at face value, and it is just it's skin deep what we know about this at the moment. We're yet to kind of get into the guts of all of this detail. But as it currently stands, Rishi Sunak might have done enough to appease people in the ERG, to appease the DUP, to get something through and to get things moving. That's the early noises that's coming out of it. We're going to go to Downing Street shortly, not right now, though, but shortly, to see if we can find out anything and any little whispers around the corridors of power there as to how the more Brexity elements of the Conservative Party are taking this, because they're the ones who could rebel on it. But we're going to go now to GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey. He's in Windsor. He was in the room. He could smell Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen there. Darren, what's your take on what we've just seen and heard?
Yeah, really fascinating, isn't it, that effectively the Prime Minister is portraying this as a turning point. That's what he wants to do as part of his sell. But we don't really have the detail. Yes, we've got the broad strokes around the green lanes and the rule and the role of stallments potentially as well, and this idea that the goods being sold on supermarket shelves here in Northern Ireland in Britain will be available in Northern Ireland. Though, if you've been into any shop recently, Patrick, you'll know that actually some of the shelves in the supermarkets here are quite bare. But in the end, what he is trying to do is to win over his Conservative right. Interestingly, being in that room, being up close to both Ursula von der Leyen and to the Prime Minister, it's clear they've got a good personal rapport. I think she kept referring to him, didn't she, as Dear Rishi at certain points during that press conference. It is also clear, I think, that the EU have moved significantly. Now, there has been a recognition from Dublin and from Brussels in the last couple of months or so that they feel that the current protocol, Article 16, probably went too far, that it's in some ways antagonised unionists too much, and that they did need to row back a little bit, and that is what we've seen today. But be in no doubt, in some ways, Patrick, the easy part of all of this has been the negotiations between the EU and Britain. The fact that the EU were prepared to give an opening to Rishi Sunak. The really, really difficult bit now comes on the sell. How will MPs in his own party react in the House of Commons tonight? And indeed, how will the Northern Irish parties, politically the DUP, how will they react in the days and weeks to come when we get the actual detail? Interestingly, the Prime Minister did confirm there will be a vote in Parliament, though we're just not entirely sure when that will be.
Yeah, Darren, look, thank you very, very much. Darren McCaffrey there, who's in Windsor. He's our political editor. I'm going to go live to Westminster now because Darren was saying that Rishi Sunak, the biggest job for him now is to sell this to the politicians in this big famous building in Westminster. And just outside it, I believe, is GB News' political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, thank you very much. So, two things, really. What's going to happen tonight in terms of around 6:30, I believe? Rishi Sunak's going to talk to MPs, but also just the early little whispers from those corridors of power there about the ERG and about the Brexiteers' wings of the Conservative Party. What's the sense like from where you are, Olivia?
Well, yes, Rishi Sunak is going to talk to Parliament tonight, but he's not tonight going to give MPs a vote, though he has said that he will give them a vote somewhere down the line. Now, that solves some of his immediate problems, because lots of the whisperings were that it would be an insult to democracy if Rishi Sunak refused to give a vote. The whisperings at the moment... And I should stress they really are whisperings because, as we know, the ERG has been very clear that it wants to see properly the full text of the deal before it makes any comments at all. But the whisperings are pretty warm. Of course, we had Brexit half-man Steve Baker, as he styled himself, who's now a Northern Ireland minister, come out this morning and say that he felt that the Prime Minister was on the cusp of securing a fantastic result for everyone involved. Now, that was certainly very positive. Then you've got Mark Francis Francois, who's the current chair of the ERG, who has been very, very bullish so far about any deal which goes any way at all to dissatisfying the DUP being completely unacceptable. He is now talking about having a full plenary meeting of 60 members of the ERG tonight to go over what we know of the deal and to decide what they make of it. But the good news for Rishi Sunak is that they haven't come out fighting already, and the noises are that they do really want to back it. The problem, of course, is that they have promised that they will move in lockstep with the DUP, and if the DUP has issues with any elements of the deal, and I think the phrase which might alarm DUP members is Ursula von der Leyen saying that the ECJ is the ultimate arbiter of EU laws, and so it's not 100% clear how this break or veto for Stormont would work. Would Stormont really be allowed to veto EU laws it wouldn't like, or would it come down to the EU in the end? That's the stumbling point for the DUP, and even if the ERG would very much like to back it, it would politically be very, very difficult for them now to diverge from the DUP. So the noises are positive, but it all still depends quite a lot on those noises coming from Jeffrey Donaldson to see what that ERG group of 60 members is going to do.
Yeah, exactly. Look, Olivia, thank you very, very much. Olivia Utley there, our political reporter, just outside Westminster. Some really important points there. And I'm keen, actually, we keep banging on here, don't we, to say about, oh, the people who really matter in this are the DUP, the people who really matter in this are the members of the ERG. Well, what about the actual people, you at home, and you, the viewers and listeners? Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Bit of a mixed bag at the moment, it's fair to say. I will go and read out some of those emails to begin with, but I just wonder whether or not you feel as though you've been put in a really awful position here, because if you don't like this deal, then that's the deal you're getting, OK? Labour have promised to wave it through. Rishi Sunak quite possibly would just ignore the ERG or the quotes-unquote hard Brexit elements of his party. If you decide that you don't like it and you don't want to vote for Rishi Sunak, then who do you vote for? The guy who's going to wave it through anyway. So potentially you're between a rock and a hard place. Let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But a key point that I think will get a lot of you going is this, which is the European Court of Justice is the sole and ultimate arbiter of EU law. That is natural because it is prescribed by the EU legal order. So the ECJ will have final say on EU law and single market issues. That is a quote from Ursula von der Leyen, and that, I think, is going to get a lot of people going. Joining me now and throughout the rest of the hour is political editor of the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People. It's Nigel Nelson, and, of course, I have also got GB News' political correspondent, the effervescent Tom Harwood. Nigel, I might as well start with you. Thank you very much. Nigel, yes, look, big concerns here over the ECJ and whether or not they're going to continue to have, frankly, final say over the law of Northern Ireland, because that is not Brexit.
No, exactly. And that seemed to be the elephant in the room when Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen were talking. The last thing they wanted to talk about was what the role of the ECJ might be. What is clear is it will have some role. And that's a problem for the DUP because of their 7 tests. Their first test, which is the most important, is that every citizen in the UK must be under the same laws. Quite clearly, if the European Court of Justice has jurisdiction in Northern Ireland, but not on mainland Britain, that won't satisfy the first of those tests. So at the moment, the best thing you can say about this is that everyone is not going to get all that they wanted, but everyone will get something that they wanted. So unquestionably, when it comes down to real people, this is a much better deal than the Northern Ireland Protocol, so it does solve a number of issues. And the one thing that Rishi Sunak has achieved, which the previous 3 prime ministers have been unable to, is that the EU said all along they would never change the protocol. They just have.
Yes, and that's a really important point, Nigel. Tom, I'll bring that to you. Who's made more concessions here at face value, us or them?
At face value, the EU has made more concessions. Of course, the UK made a huge number of concessions over Northern Ireland to get Brexit over the line back in 2020. And I think speaking to a lot of people at that time, there was always the sort of expectation that this was a starting point, that you would iteratively improve the deal as time goes on. But I think it is stark just how many different areas we are being told have been improved. And again, this point about ECJ having jurisdiction in Northern Ireland. Patrick, you used the phrase was the final arbiter. I think that is contestable. Depending on how this Stormont break works, Stormont could well be the final arbiter if it has this veto power over EU law. Now, we've only got the headlines, we don't yet have the detail, but Ursula von der Leyen said it's based on the petition of concern within the Good Friday Agreement. That means that if 30 members of the Legislative Assembly in Northern Ireland, that's 1/3 of that assembly, which is nowhere near a majority, of course, if that is the same mechanism that could put a veto on EU law, that's a very powerful veto that a minority could actually pursue, that, for example, the DUP or the UUP combined sort of smaller groups within Northern Ireland, within that assembly, they could block EU law. That's a huge thing, but we do need to see the detail to see if that's really, really true.
And again, just want to emphasise we're expecting all of that detail to drop in a massive kind of detailed dump very, very shortly, which we will be picking it through. But, Nigel, one thing we do know is the optics, OK? And we've got Rishi Sunak there, and I know this is getting people going in my inbox here, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Him cozying up to Ursula von der Leyen, very lovey-dovey, wasn't it? The fact that Ursula von der Leyen is off to meet the King, that's got people outraged. Why are we bringing the King, our monarch, our sovereign, into something political? Nigel, I'm not sure the optics of this, whether or not they really mean anything. It's not winning the hearts and minds of the Brexiteers.
No, it certainly isn't. And I cannot understand for the life of me why it was necessary. Ursula von der Leyen isn't a head of state. She's a president of the European Commission. And there's no reason at all why the King needed to meet her on this particular occasion. Now, I mean, as Jacob Rees-Mogg has said, that constitutionally, and he'll probably be repeating it when he does his programme tonight, constitutionally, it is a really weird thing to bring the King in on something that is a hugely contentious issue. And so it was never necessary. And I can't think what sort of youngster in number 10 has come up with this rather weird idea that they thought it'd be a good thing. The DUP are against it. I can't believe Sinn Féin are a great monarchist either.
I have to say, I understood from Number 10 a little bit earlier today. They seem to be implying that it wasn't generated from Number 10, that Number 10 sort of advised that it could go ahead. But there were some hints from behind that black shining door that actually it was Ursula von der Leyen's team that wanted to meet the King. Now, I'm not sure who we should believe in this situation, but clearly blame's flying around.
Should we have let her? I'd like to meet the King, but, you know, I've got to sit here. Why is Ursula von der Leyen doing it?
Well, I suppose the European Commission President does often meet heads of state at G7 meetings, at G20 meetings. The EU Commission President, while not a head of state themselves, does attend these international summits. And we'll remember the G7 back in Cornwall. Was it last year or the year before? Yeah. The European Commission President met the then Queen then. So it's not an unprecedented sort of thing.
Yeah, well, OK, fair enough. We'll have to wait and see, obviously, exactly how this all pans out, I suppose. But it does look as though Rishi Sunak has managed to stave off an initial wave of absolute utter hatred and resignations. And so that, I suppose, in itself is a win. Look, both of you are going to be joining me, I think, throughout the course of the show. I'm just going to let people know a bit about what else we've got coming up, because I'm conscious of the fact that we've done non-stop Northern Ireland so far. So thank you very much, everybody. Look, we are going to touch on a couple of the other big stories of the day. And one of those, I think, is really going to get a lot of you going, and that is the fact that there was a particular chap who was on a deportation flight from this country, was supposed to be being deported back to the Caribbean. That flight was stopped by, as Priti Patel, our former Home Secretary, has called it, do-gooder lawyers. He managed to stay in the United Kingdom and, unfortunately, went on to commit an incredibly heinous crime. And we're going to be talking about all of this. We're going to be having a debate on this as well. Are do-gooder lawyers getting in the way of, frankly, our national security and our personal security? Is it another example now of how soft-touch approach to deportation flights, etc., mean that we end up with people in this country who shouldn't be here because they've committed crimes or whatever, who then can walk the streets of Britain and go on to, in cases, actually kill people. How do you feel about all of that? GBviews at gbnews.uk. It's not all Northern Ireland here today, although, of course, that is the big story in town, because it's not really just a Northern Ireland story. It's a United Kingdom story, it's a Brexit story, and we'll be covering that. But, yes, when we come back, I will be talking a bit about this deportation flight that never actually happened, and that, I know, will get a lot of people very angry, because that individual went on to kill. How many more of these situations are we going to see? You're with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News, and hold on to your hats, people, because it is non-stop breaking news today. See you in a tick.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines. And a new post-Brexit deal for Northern Ireland has been described as a decisive breakthrough, with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak saying it'll deliver smooth-flowing free trade across the UK while protecting the country's sovereignty. Both Rishi Sunak and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the agreement marks a new chapter in the UK and the EU's relationship. The Prime Minister said Parliament will get to vote on the deal and he hopes it'll also win the approval of the Democratic Unionist Party.
It's about showing that our union, that has lasted for centuries, can and will endure. And it's about breaking down the barriers between us, setting aside the arguments that for too long have divided us, and remembering that fellow feeling that defines us, this family of nations, this united kingdom.
Well, in other news, the energy regulator has reduced the cap on how much suppliers can charge customers, but bills are still expected to rise. Ofgem has announced the cap on the amount households pay for gas and electricity will drop by almost £1,000 from the 1st of April. However, customers are still likely to pay 20% more on their annual bills, as the government's additional support only partially protects them. The Labour leader says he wants to bring the UK back to being a rock of economic stability. Sir Keir Starmer used a speech in central London to set out his economic vision, saying Britain needs certainty but also change in order to achieve the goal. He said his real ambition was growth from the grassroots. Those are your headlines. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
Yeah, look, people, I want to swerve this Brexit story for a while and talk about another story which I'm really keen to get stuck into, actually. I know it's going to get a lot of you going. Ernesto Elliott, remember the name, was saved from deportation to Jamaica by a load of, well, they've been called lefty lawyers. But just 6 months after that plane was stopped from taking off, he murdered a man in a horrific knife fight. Priti Patel, who oversaw the original attempt to remove Elliott when she was head of the Home Office, said that this case showed why it was crucial to defy, quoting now, do-gooders who try to block deportations. Joining me in the studio right now is GB News' national reporter, Paul Hawkins. Paul, it's important to just outline the facts of this, really, before we pass comment, of course.
Yes, this is Ernesto Elliott. He's on a Home Office deportation flight in December 2020. He's got a conviction for knife crime. There were a series of legal challenges that meant the flight kept being delayed. He was one of 23 serious criminals. There were 50 people in total on the flight, as I understand it, ready for deportation. And then a series of legal challenges, including an open letter signed by celebrities, authors, public figures, also Labour and Liberal Democrat MPs, requested that the flight be delayed. They compared the deportation to the Windrush scandal, some might argue unfairly. Then 6 months later, the same man robbed and murdered a 35-year-old man, Nathaniel Ogo, in a drugs row. He was sentenced last month, Ernesto Elliott, to 26 years minimum term, a life sentence, 26 years minimum, with 12 years to run concurrently for robbery. According to reports today, I don't know where they've got these figures from, but they think that we could end up spending over £1 million in terms of taxpayer funded, in terms of how much time he spends in jail. We don't know where those figures have come from, but we certainly know that obviously the taxpayer will be picking up the bill for the amount of time he spends in jail. But those are kind of the facts as we know them.
Good grief. Look, Paul, thank you very much for that. I'm going to bring in Benjamin Loughnane now, who's a senior research fellow at the Bow Group. And Benjamin, I can remember when this story was first happening, and I can remember actually speaking to someone who's from a human rights group and saying, do you know who's on this plane? Are you absolutely certain that you know who's on this plane? And they were telling us, yes, it's just like the Windrush generation. Well, actually, I'm sorry, but one of them, clearly, at least anyway, is an individual who was involved in drugs, was wielding a knife and has gone to murder on the streets of Britain.
Yeah, I remember this at the time as well. I had so many debates at the time saying we really need to be careful about stopping these deportations, because at least one of these people, not all of them, but at least one of them will go on to commit a crime, and then, you know, people are going to have to answer some questions about why they stopped those deportations taking place. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, here we are. We've seen it play out.
But the reality here, OK, is that this individual was basically on a plane.
Yeah.
OK, so pretty much on the tarmac, ready to take off. We do not want, many people would say, people like this in the country, OK?
No.
And then people get involved. Celebrities wade in, all the old classics, don't they? Oh, yes. They all wade into it. And then now we have a man who's died,
And I'm sorry, but you have to seriously question whether or not some people have got blood on their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's this misguided sense of charity and compassion, these fashionable causes of, you know, we're going to jump on a bandwagon and sort of throw up signs saying stop the deportations and the nasty Tories trying to keep people out of the country. But what's charitable about endangering people's lives? Because these are criminals, these are people who commit serious offences, and it's not just the murder, it's not just that. There's a lot of these people were absolute nasty thugs, and allowing those people to run loose on the streets of Britain, there's nothing charitable about that.
This is the thing. I think we need to be able to, as a nation, have a conversation about the fact that things have gone wrong in the past when it's come to the Windrush generation, etc. Yeah, absolutely. But then separate those things from the fact that at the moment, and Priti Patel was alluding to this, former Home Secretary, she was Home Secretary at the time, she criticised what she called as do-gooders. And from where I'm sitting, there are a lot of people in this country who want to throw a blanket over everyone arriving here. And unfortunately, we have a situation, Benjamin, now where individuals like this can go on to murder on the streets. We have no idea how many fully grown men are in schools at the moment, pretending to be 15-year-olds in classes, people going on to commit crimes, and we need to have a more nuanced conversation.
We really do. We need to stop dividing it into any kind of deportation is somehow awful and evil and wrong, and any kind of virtuous keeping people in the countries is a great thing. There are some people who shouldn't be in the country, and if they're not British citizens, and the government has its primary job and its responsibility is to protect British citizens, some people do need to be deported. And it's not just about safety, it's also about the cost. Because if these people end up in British jails, they might be doing a full life term at the cost of about 40 grand a year per prisoner. And that's just a drain on the taxpayer as well. So there's safety, there's the cost. And I do think the government needs to be able to say this person should be deported and it should be fast-tracked. And we shouldn't be allowing the lawyers to have this amount of power over.
I think people will be absolutely outraged that there's a cottage industry of these people who clearly make money out of getting people like this individual who went on to kill someone in a drugs-related incident in this country, to get them to stay in this country. And the cost to the taxpayer, reportedly, is going to be about £1 million to keep this guy in this country. Now, he was on a plane, he was on his way off, and now someone is dead and the taxpayer's out of pocket, and this is happening, I think, could happen more and more and more. I mean, what would you say to those lawyers who seem hell-bent on, and the Human Rights Brigade, etc., who seem hell-bent on keeping some of these people in this country? What do they say to the normal man and woman on the street?
Well, the lawyers, you know, they bear some responsibility, and I absolutely think, as a lawyer, you really should focus on the ethics behind this sort of thing as well. But we also have a responsibility to prevent those legal avenues which enable it, because we've created an industry where people can claim legal aid, the taxpayers then paying for the defence of these people, the lawyers are lining their pockets, and it really is a legislative thing. We need to eliminate that on a legal level to prevent it from happening ever again.
Yeah, no, indeed, and this is the thing of it. I mean, the emails are coming in thick and fast on this. I mean, Patrick, people saying here, Patrick, look, we do not need people like this in the country. Should have been deported. It's a no-brainer, says Joyce. Well, I wish it was a no-brainer, Joyce, but clearly it isn't. But moving forward, how do we make sure that this stuff doesn't happen again? Because when people see deportation flights, I mean, we've had the Rwanda scheme. I mean, that wasn't even supposed to be criminals. That was just people who came here illegally, right? That couldn't even take off. Right now, in this country, we can't even get potential murderers out, can we?
No, it's outrageous. Basically, no one can be deported unless there's it's an exception, not a rule. You're not saving people from deportation who have a really good reason to be in the country. You're lucky if you can even get rid of serious criminals. And, we need to take a long, hard look at the Human Rights Act. We need to take a look at our relationship with the ECHR, and we need to start doing some legislative things in order to prevent this from happening. But you also have, for example, as I said, with legal aid, why is it that people who aren't British citizens can claim off the British taxpayer their defence?
And apparently, Shamima Begum has been getting all legal aid as well. So you and me, Benjamin, we've been lucky enough to delve into our pockets in the middle of a cost of living crisis and help Shamima Begum attempt to get back into the UK. One quick one finally. Look, apparently Labour politicians, as Paul was saying, Lib Dem politicians, were jumping on this bandwagon trying to get this flight stopped. Do you think they should stand before the public and account for their actions?
I do think an apology needs to be given for that.
OK, Benjamin, thank you very much. Benjamin Loughnane there, who is a research fellow for migration at the Bow Group, doesn't pull any punches. A Home Office spokesperson said in relation to this case, foreign national offenders who exploit our system and commit crimes here in the UK will face the full force of the law, including deportation at the earliest opportunity for those eligible. The government is committed to stopping abuse of the immigration system, taking decisive action against those who try to play the system, while legal challenges
can frustrate immediate deportation, we remain resolute in our commitment to deport those who abuse our hospitality. And just very quickly, I just want to say to people out there now, the kind of people who are emailing in, you know, I don't think you're insane for thinking that you can see all of these problems that are just facing us dead ahead, where people who are supposed to be deported on the grounds of things like criminality, if they're allowed to stay, sometimes will go on and commit crimes like this, murder, and you're not insane for not necessarily wanting that to happen, despite what some people might tell you. Keep your views coming in, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Moving on, though, for now, I've got loads coming your way. We're going to have to rattle through. The off-gem price cap is about to go down, but guess what? Our energy prices are going up. Oh, so yes, another way we're out of pocket. It's a good job we're not paying for all those criminals. Oh, no, wait, we are. I'll see you in a tick.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, well, look, as you can imagine, we're going to be returning very shortly anyway to the big news of the day, which is a potential Brexit breakthrough. What all of this really does mean, though, will Rishi Sunak essentially see the implosion of the Tory party, or will it be the making of him? Lots to discuss there. But what about the money in your pocket? For a different story now, because there's good news and bad news when it comes to energy prices today. And the good news is that off-gem price cap will be cut by almost £1,000 in April due to a fall in wholesale prices. The bad news is the average energy bill will also still increase by around £500 a year due to the changes of the government's energy price guarantee. Joining me now on the show is Andy Mayer, who's an energy and infrastructure analyst at the Institute for Economic Affairs. Andy, thank you very much. Some people are getting very angry about all of this now. What do you make of it?
Well, at one level, it's long forecast, so there's nothing unexpected here. What's really happened is that underlying energy bills have come down by about £1,000 a year for a typical household. A typical household won't see that. What they're going to see instead is an increase by £900 for a couple of reasons. One of which is the increase of the energy price cap from 2,500 to 3,000, and the other is the withdrawal of the energy bill subsidy scheme of about £400, which was only operating for 6 months. So in terms of what you actually see in terms of the bills, it depends on your energy use. But for that typical household, they're going up by about £75 a month for 3 months before falling substantially again in the summer below the level of the energy price cap, we think, but it's uncertain. And then you'll be seeing things that are about double what you used to pay before this crisis kicked off. So somewhere in the region of £2,000 to £2,300 a year. There's still a lot, but not quite the disaster that we were all worried about when we started talking about this over a year ago.
No, exactly. It's not quite the disaster we were all worried about. And also, as well, it's important, I think, Andy, to emphasise, isn't it, that taxpayers have been footing the bill quite a lot for these energy price caps, etc., and for grants and things like that, haven't they? So is it actually about time that people maybe rip the Band-Aid off and just grin and bear it a little bit if they can?
Yeah, it's also important to note that ripping the Band-Aid off doesn't mean for the most vulnerable households. So a lot of the welfare schemes that were put in place to help people who really could not pay these bills are still there. We've lost the £400, but you can still get £650 in the cost of living payment. You can still get the winter fuel discount of about £150, and there's another £150 to £300 for pensioners. So if you need help, the support is there. And if all of those fail, many of the energy companies and some local authorities also provide schemes that can help people directly if they're really struggling or have had some massive adverse situation happen in their lives. So for the rest of us, yeah, we should be paying the full cost of energy. And the reason for that is if we don't, what happens is that the government, or rather we, are subsidising energy use. And that's the worst possible thing to do when energy prices are so high. What we want people to do is if they don't need to use the energy, don't use it. And the example often used is don't turn on the swimming pool heater. Don't, if you've got a hot tub, use that. Try and find ways of saving energy and investing in things in your home that will help energy use.
All right, Andy, look, thank you very, very much. Andy Mayer there, who is, of course, the Energy and Infrastructure Analyst at the IEA. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up on all of that, because that's something that could easily get lost in all of today's big news, isn't it? The fact that essentially your energy bills are going to go up. But we'll talk about that again a little bit later on. Just quickly, before we return to the main story of the day, Rishi Sunak, Ursula von der Leyen, she's meeting the King as well. It's important to emphasise that's a row in itself. We'll be talking about that shortly. But a story that a lot of you have been emailing in about, which is this convicted criminal who avoided deportation on a Home Office charter flight to Jamaica, following all of these legal challenges from what Priti Patel, who was the Home Secretary at the time, have called a do-gooder lawyers, OK, the woke brigade. He went on to commit murder right here in this country. Ernesto Elliott, he was originally from Jamaica. Now, he was due to board a flight back to his country of origin back in December 2020. But then all of these challenges stopped it. People were saying, oh, it's just like the Windrush generation. You ended up with a load of Labour MPs and Lib Dem MPs and celebrities as well saying, oh, we can't possibly do it. Anyway, it influenced the situation, and then he was back in the UK and he managed to go on and actually murder someone. And Anna said all these celebrities, Labour MPs, Lib Dem politicians, etc., who signed the petition to keep Ernesto Elliott in the UK should be collectively ashamed of themselves. Patrick, I would like to ask who these people are. This is from Susan, who supported the stopping deportation. Gary's been on as well. Just time for one more. Why aren't we prioritising the safety, Gary's view here, of people already in this country? And yes, Gary, it is a bizarre situation where in this nation at the moment we do not know how many adult males are in schools and people coming across the channel, etc. They cannot tell us that because we can't do proper age checks. And then on top of it as well, you have people who we've tried to deport, essentially, who we cannot deport, who are free, it would appear, to go on and commit murder. And then on top of that, we have to pay, if reports are to be believed, around £1 million it'll cost the taxpayer. £1 million to keep this chap in prison for a minimum of 26 years. So lots to talk about there. But I am going to return now to the main stories dominating the headlines, and that is that the Prime Minister's Brexit deal with the EU has been agreed, at least in principle. Now, Rishi Sunak says it's a decisive breakthrough on the sticky issue of cross-border trade in Northern Ireland, but there's a lot more to it than that. I'm joined by Nigel Nelson, who is political editor at the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People. I'm also joined by our very own Tom Harwood, who, as you can see there, is beavering away, trying to get us across all of the latest detail. Nigel, thank you very much for joining us again. Look, I just want to pick up on something we were talking about before, which is that Rishi Sunak's trying to bracket this as a deal for the people, OK? So, you'll get the food, you'll be able to send your parcels, I can bring down the price of a pint, your pet will be able to travel seamlessly across the Irish Sea there one way and the other. Medicines that are approved in the UK, etc., will be available there. But the reality is there's serious question marks, Nigel, as to whether or not the EU is still in charge of the law in Northern Ireland.
Yes, and it did seem to be that what Ursula von der Leyen was saying was, well, actually they are. That you've got this Stormont break. We don't know how that will actually work, but the idea is that it means that the Stormont Assembly will be able to disapply EU law that would adversely affect Northern Ireland. The bit we don't know is quite then who polices that decision. Will that be Northern Ireland courts? Will they have the last say? The impression being given is that actually they won't, that will end up going, if it needs a court of last resort, if you like, that would end up being the European Court of Justice. That's going to cause major problems with the DUP because their argument is the law of the UK should apply in Northern Ireland, not the law of the EU.
Yeah. Exactly. And look, we've been billing it throughout the course of this show as an absolutely seismic day. When the history books are written, today will actually be an iconic moment in it because it could outline, yes, the future of Rishi Sunak. It could outline the future of the Tory party, could also outline the future of the United Kingdom. And these are absolutely seismic things. And Tom Harwood, I'm just going to bring it in and throw an open-ended one to you because you've been bang across this, beavering away there. What do you actually just want to talk about on this?
Well, I've been reading through the command paper that the United Kingdom has just published. There are reams of documents now available on gov.uk, and I'm afraid I haven't read through every jot and tittle of every one. There are so many different pages. I mean, it will take weeks to go through all of this thing. It's no wonder we're not going to see a vote in Parliament tonight. But the summaries within the command paper are very, very interesting. It confirms what we understood about this veto that Stormont has. A new law coming in from the EU that would significantly change the way that goods are regulated in Northern Ireland, even if a part of that law was objected to by Stormont. That could be vetoed. It would only take 30 Assembly members to veto. Now, they have to be from two different parties, but, for example, the DUP and the UUP together could decide to veto a new EU law. What would then happen is it would go to arbitration between the UK and the EU. Note, not European Court of Justice arbitration, but independent arbitration. And then, if the UK didn't agree or thought that this was too different from the UK, was dragging the Northern Ireland away from the UK's internal market, that could be disapplied, and it wouldn't be applied in Northern Ireland. That's, from a skim reading of that section, it seems to be pretty comprehensive.
All right. Now, that's technical, and that's what we're here to do as well. But, Nigel, just from hearing that, what does that practically mean? Who's happy as a result of that, and what should the public think about it, potentially?
Well, I mean, as far as the public go, businesses obviously are very happy. The FTSE index went up by 60 points. The pound went up a cent against the dollar. So the markets are quite happy with it. I think the key thing is that, as Tom has just been outlining, it is incredibly complex, but it really does come down to, at the final analysis, just what part EU law will play in Northern Ireland. And then, does the European Court of Justice have some kind of role in that? Now, that's going to be the key for the DUP. When it comes down to the ERG in Parliament, the Tory Brexiteer MPs, they're likely to actually support the DUP, whatever they decide. But as Thomas said, gov.uk is the place where you dump documents in plain sight and they remain secret. It'll take ages to actually go through them all to find out exactly what this means.
Absolutely. Tom, I'm just going to ask you to comment on something that is really kicking off at the moment, which is the idea that Ursula von der Leyen is off to meet the King. And people are saying, why on earth is Charles being forced to meet someone who, well, let's be honest with you, she's not exactly the leader of a, well, you could argue, a superpower. You know, she was a failed defence minister in Germany, some would say.
She wasn't a failed defence minister in Germany, but the way the EU works is that when politicians fail domestically, they get promoted internationally. And we've seen this time and time again. We saw it with Jean-Claude Juncker, we saw it with Guy Verhofstadt, we've seen it with Ursula von der Leyen. It's how the EU works. You fail upwards. But to be serious for a second, the European Commission President is a very powerful position. The EU, of course, has supremacy over its member states. This was the big argument of the Brexiteers during the referendum. The power of the unelected EU Commission. Yes, you can laugh at the people who hold the positions. You can say how silly and how failed they were in their previous jobs. But ultimately, they hold supremacy over EU law, and EU law holds supremacy over EU member states. Incredibly powerful position. And so we do need to take the EU Commission President serious.
I've got to cut you off. Right, we're going now, ladies and gentlemen. When I come back, I'll have more on what is an absolutely historic day for Britain. Has Rishi Sunak just signed his own political death warrant, or actually is he the man of the hour? Stay tuned, because we've got it all coming your way in just a matter of moments.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Yeah, welcome back. Absolutely massive day this, and a huge final hour of this show coming your way right now. So a Brexit deal has been done, and the Prime Minister and EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen announced the so-called Windsor framework at a press conference this afternoon. Tom Harwood is sitting next to me, and he is going to be picking through this word by word because it's just dropped. And by the way, there's some absolute corkers in there, so we'll bring you that very shortly. Some unexpected twists and turns in this deal. We'll have them all live on this show. In other news, though, you thought it was over, but now the government's terror watchdog has apparently said that Shamima Begum should be allowed to return to the UK. Here we go again. We'll be debating the rights and wrongs of that once again. Also, similar news, slightly different though. An individual who was supposed to be deported was taken off the plane by those lefty human rights lawyers. He went on to commit a murder. We'll talk about that and get a load of this. James Bond. Yep, that's right, James Bond. Well, he could be cancelled for being sexist and misogynistic. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Right now, though, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. Well, as you've been hearing, a new post-Brexit deal for Northern Ireland has been described as a decisive breakthrough, with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, saying it'll deliver smooth-flowing free trade access across the UK while protecting the country's sovereignty. Both Rishi Sunak and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the agreement marks a new chapter in the relationship between the EU and the UK. The Prime Minister said Parliament will get a chance to vote on the deal, and he hopes it'll also win the approval of the Democratic Unionist Party.
It's about showing that our union, that has lasted for centuries, can and will endure. And it's about breaking down the barriers between us, setting aside the arguments that for too long have divided us, and remembering that fellow feeling that defines us, this family of nations, this united kingdom.
Well, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the deal strengthens the mutual relationship.
The new Windsor framework respects and protects our respective markets and our respective legitimate interests. And most importantly, it protects the very hard-earned peace gains of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement for the people of Northern Ireland and across the island of Ireland.
Now, CCTV footage has been released of a car used by the gunman who shot an off-duty officer in Omagh. Senior Detective John Caldwell was shot multiple times at a sports complex in County Tyrone last week. The forces appeal to anyone who may have seen the vehicle in the 2 weeks leading up to the attack. And Crime Stoppers has offered up to £20,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest. The energy regulator has reduced the cap on how much suppliers can charge customers, but bills are still expected to rise. Ofgem has announced the cap on the amount households pay for gas and electricity will drop by almost £1,000, and that's from the 1st of April. However, customers are still likely to pay 20% more on their annual bills, as the government's additional support only partially protects them. It means the average households will most likely pay £500 more a year than they did before. The Labour leader has said today he wants to bring the UK back to being a rock of economic stability. Sir Keir Starmer used a speech in central London to set out his economic vision for Britain, saying the country needed certainty but also change in order to achieve that goal. He said his real ambition was growth from the grassroots.
A new model for economic growth, growth from the grassroots, where wealth is created everywhere, by everyone, for everyone. Raise our collective sights beyond the day-to-day, deliver the long-term solutions our country needs. So here, in this document, the mission: secure the highest sustained growth in the G7, a measurable goal.
Well, flags are flying at half-mast in Westminster today, following the death of the former House of Commons Speaker, Baroness Betty Boothroyd. She became the first woman to be elected as Speaker in April 1992, staying on in the role until October 2000. The current Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, called her an inspiring woman and inspirational politician, describing her as one of a kind. The Baroness has died at the age of 93. Half of people in the UK have reported cutting back on food shopping in recent weeks as price rises take their toll on household budgets. An Office for National Statistics survey shows around a tenth of adults say they often or sometimes run out of food and can't afford to buy any more. That's in the last month. 13% said they'd cut down on meal sizes because there wasn't enough money for food. Grocery price inflation, meanwhile, has surged to 16.7% in January, adding around £800 to annual shopping bills. And lastly, the legal age at which you can get married has now risen to 18 to help protect vulnerable children. 16 and 17-year-olds can no longer wed or enter a civil partnership in England or Wales from today, even with a parental consent. The law change means it's now a crime to exploit children by forcing them into an arranged marriage. The Girls Not Brides Coalition has called it a huge victory. You're with GB News. I'm back in half an hour.
OK, it is 7 minutes past 5, and I've got absolutely loads to talk to you about between now and the end of this hour. Yes, we're going to be talking about the Northern Ireland issue. Yes, we're going to be talking about the Brexit issue and what it all really means. We're going to be having a massive debate as to whether or not people who are proper Brexiteers should just suck this up, swallow what Rishi's offering and basically move on forward. We've got Tom Harwood, who's live with us. He's going to be talking in a matter of seconds. He's picking through the detail of Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen's agreement as we speak. We're also going to be discussing the fact that Ursula von der Leyen went to meet the King. I mean, goodness gracious me, she's not even, some would argue, a proper world leader. Why was she allowed to do that? But there are other stories in town that I want you to know we are across. An individual who was on a deportation flight was wheeled off of that deportation flight by the do-gooding lawyers. Surprise, surprise, he's got involved in drugs and he's gone on to murder someone on the streets of Britain. Oh, and it's going to cost the taxpayer £1 million to keep him in prison. Shamima Begum, well, apparently she might be coming back again. I know it feels like Groundhog Day, but there we go. I've got all of that coming your way and much more, including the fact that James Bond might be about to be cancelled for being some kind of vile, misogynistic, sexist pig. But there we go. But yes, there's only one way to start this hour now, and that is Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen. They hailed a decisive breakthrough after they'd agreed a new post-Brexit deal. So the PM confirmed there will be green and red lanes for goods into Northern Ireland. He says, we've removed any sense of a border in the Irish Sea. All of this sounds good so far, doesn't it? But it's unclear whether the DUP will back the deal. But Rishi Sunak says that it will take time for people to digest the agreement. So, yeah, we got it dropped today. It's gone online, all of the fine print. And Tom Harwood is here with me right now. Tom, thank you very, very much, our political reporter. Every now and again, Tom lets out a little guffaw as he reads something on his laptop in this document that he thinks is of real interest. And you identified something absolutely massive, didn't you?
Yes, I did. There are 16 documents that have been published on the gov.uk website, hundreds of pages between them. I'm going through what's called the command paper, the government's sort of overview of everything. And there are some really key points in here in terms of what has actually been agreed. We heard, for example, Rishi Sunak say that VAT will be able to be levied in the same way in Northern Ireland as it is in the UK. Yeah. VAT and excise duty. So if they want to cut tax on booze, that'll be the same in Great Britain as Northern Ireland. Under the protocol, that's not the case. Under the Windsor Agreement, they say that's the case. Is it really? Because that was part of the legal treaty text. Well, the command paper says that the legal text of the treaty will be amended under this Windsor Agreement.
Break it down for thickos like me. Why is that such a big deal?
People didn't necessarily think that this agreement between the UK and the EU would have the weight of a treaty. Treaty law is really, really weighty in international law. It sits above national law. Now, what a lot of people thought this agreement would be is sort of a handshake between the UK and the EU. Oh, I promise to do this, you promise to do that, but actually that they might be able to turn their back on or do in a slightly malicious way. The fact that this actually amends the text of treaty, that means that all 27 EU countries have to agree to it, as well as the UK. That's a huge diplomatic move and carries something very, very weighty. That that puts much more force behind this agreement than I think many people were expecting.
Yeah, now, Tom, it's a good job you're here because I've just been given some more breaking news. It's been non-stop, this show. DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, hugely important figure when it comes to this deal, has said that significant progress has been made in the new Northern Ireland Protocol deal, but, he said, there remain key issues of concern. Now, they set 7 tests, the DUP, to be happy with this deal, essentially. And those 7 tests, I'm going to rattle through them now with you. Northern Irish customers are not disadvantaged by the protocol and forced to go to non-Great Britain suppliers for goods otherwise available in the UK. He says there should be no border in the Irish Sea. Northern Ireland has, quotes, a say in making the laws which govern them. Yeah, I think that's fair enough, isn't it? No checks on goods going from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, vice versa. No new regulatory borders or laws, and he says the consent principle in the Good Friday Agreement is upheld. They are also demanding as well, which is that Northern Ireland is treated the same as Scotland, England and Wales. Those are the 7 tests. Now, if Geoffrey Donaldson pulls the pin on this and says the DUP is absolutely not behind it, from what we can gather, the ERG, the very Brexity element of the Tory party, they've said that they wouldn't be behind it either, which puts Rishi Sunak in the really awkward situation of having to rely on Keir Starmer's Labour to get this through. Tom, what do you make of what Geoffrey Donaldson has just said there, which is that there's been significant progress, but that there remain key issues of concern? What are you reading between the lines there?
What I'm reading there is that they want to see how deep these green lanes go. They want to see what goods specifically are within these green lanes. And I've just been reading over the command paper here that sort of says that these custom forms will go entirely for green lane goods, but that there would be normal documents accompanying that in terms of the normal sort of trade documents that might accompany trade within an internal market. Now, the detail of that we'd need to get sort of proper trade lawyers to look over to see how different that actually is. The other thing is the number of companies that are sort of entering in these trusted trader schemes as well. The key result of that is, does it feel like when you're in Northern Ireland and you buy something from Manchester, does that feel like it's in the same country or not? And I think we need to have a little bit more time looking over the real text of this. And it's understandable at this stage that the DUP is waiting for that legal analysis because there's a lot of complicated work here.
Yeah, exactly. And Rishi Sunak will be talking at around 6:30, so just over an hour's time. It'll be fascinating to see what he does. He's going to go on the hard sell, isn't he? I'm going to enter Ben Habib into the fray now. Now, he's a regular on this channel, of course he is. He's a former Brexit Party MEP, but he is also utterly wired in when it comes to the Northern Ireland issue, and crucially as well, has the ear of Geoffrey Donaldson. Ben, what are you hearing about all of this so far?
Well, Tom Harwood's got the jump on me because I haven't seen the text yet. And I think Tom is absolutely right to say that we've got to review the text in detail. And I did have an exchange with Sir Geoffrey literally a few minutes ago where he said the same thing. You know, we've got to look at the text of what comes forward. But there are a couple of things in the speech that Rishi Sunak made and that I can pick up on. And Tom, do jump in if you disagree with what I'm saying. But they described something called the Stormont break, which was basically a nod to the Good Friday Agreement, suggesting that if cross-community consent in Stormont, so that's agreement between the nationalist side of Stormont and the unionist side, wished to block a regulation that the EU wanted to make, a new law, what you call regulatory alignment, if they wished to block it through cross-community consent, agreement between nationalists and unionists, they could block it. And that isn't quite what the Good Friday Agreement says. What the Good Friday Agreement says is that in order for a change to take place, you need cross-community consent. Not that you need cross-community consent to block it. And of course, the bar over which you need to get in order to gain consent to a change is much higher than the bar in order to block it, because something will go through if you don't have the requisite votes to block it. So the default position, and Tom, please jump in if you think I've got this wrong, because you've read the text, or at least some of it. The default position seems to me that Northern Ireland will be in dynamic regulatory alignment with the EU as defined in the protocol, unless cross-community consent prohibits that in Northern Ireland. And that is the inverse of the Good Friday Agreement. So that's one area I'm going to be looking at quite carefully. I don't know if Tom wants to jump in there. For a second before I move on.
I've just been told that apparently it doesn't have to be cross-community, etc. But again, it's important that the detail will, of course, be emerging just in a matter of moments. But Ben, I just want to zoom out a little bit and look at the broader picture here, because a lot of people were wondering whether or not Rishi Sunak was going to stand up on that plinth today alongside Ursula von der Leyen. The optics of that for Brexiteers, by the way, are already catastrophic. The EU flag next to the Union flag. Yeah. It was a bit of a bit of a love-in. Something we're going to talk about shortly is the fact that she's off to meet the King, for goodness sake, as well. And you think, what's really going on here? So it's a bad starting point for people who are really staunch Brexiteers. But there has not been, based on what's been sold to us so far, there has not been a serious threat of mass resignations, mass revolt, the Tory party imploding and blowing itself up in the way that we thought. And actually, Ben, it's not a bad return so far for Rishi Sunak. There is a little glimmer of hope, is there not, for people like you to be on board with this?
Well, we've had 3 years of battling to keep Northern Ireland within the Union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, otherwise known as the United Kingdom. We've had 3 years of Boris Johnson saying he would do the internal market bill to get rid of it. They'd invoke Article 16, which is part of the protocol, to suspend it. They had their own command paper in July 2021, which came to naught. And they said they wouldn't hesitate to take the necessary action to ensure that the acts of union were completely protected, which is the acts, obviously, that created the United Kingdom. And we've seen no real genuine progress in any of those directions. So forgive Brexiteers for being slightly cynical and wishing to look at the detail of this before we come out endorsing it. But on the face of it, Patrick, the fact that you need green and red lanes in order to transfer goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland suggests not all things are quite right. You only see a green channel and a red channel when you fly into a foreign country. That's where you see them. Yeah. And so we've got to really look at the detail of this. And I mean, it's interesting that someone, at least at GBNews, has reached the conclusion that cross-community consent isn't required in order to block legislation. That's not quite what Rishi Sunak said. So I'm going to reserve my judgment till I've read not just the command paper. And by the way, government command papers summarising legislation often, in my experience, are incorrect. So I'm going to read the actual factual text and get behind the command paper.
No, absolutely. And Ben, let's be honest as well, after years and years and years of being led up the hill, down the garden path, wherever people have been led, it's not had a particularly happy conclusion, a destination of that particular journey for a lot of people who are staunch Brexiteers. So I think anyone would be sympathetic to the idea that people like yourself are just keep your powder dry until all is said and done and you can see it all written down. And I suspect that this is certainly by no means over yet. We're going to see the detail come out in the next week or so. And look, we could be thinking today, oh, he's got over the first hurdle, Rishi. It wasn't an absolute disaster. And in a week's time, we'll call him for his head. We'll have to wait and see. Ben, thank you very much. Thank you. Ben Habib there, former Brexit Party MEP. Tom Harwood's back. You can't get rid of this guy. A point of clarification, Tom. What's going on?
Well, it's interesting. The detail in the command paper suggests that based on this petition of concern, which would imply to me it's not cross-community, because a petition of concern under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement can be raised just by one community. Only 30 MLAs, members of the Assembly, need to put it forward, but they have to be from 2 or more parties. Okay. Now, those 2 parties could be both unionist parties that put forward that petition of concern. The important thing here is the command paper acknowledges that could allow for divergence between Northern Ireland and the European Union, and that's really significant.
Yeah, Tom, look, thank you very much. No doubt you'll be back in about 30 seconds' time. Tom Harwood there, our political reporter. Right, now, it has taken so long to agree a deal between the UK and the EU that at times we thought it would never happen, didn't we? Of course, people on both sides will have wanted more from this agreement. But after all this time, I want to know, and this, I think, is the big question just today, until all of the granular detail drops, OK, is realistically, at face value, are you a bit sick of all of this now? Have you been bored rigid by the words Northern Ireland Protocol for far too long? Could it bring a tear to your glass eye? I think it probably could. And I want to know whether or not your very Brexity Brexiteers should just suck it up now and deal with this, or actually, are you still of the mind, someone of deep principle and conviction, that no, there are red lines here for you that absolutely cannot be blurred. Should the DUP and the ERG simply accept this deal and move on? And joining me on the show now is Brian Monteith, who's a former MEP, and Peter Edwards as well, who's the former editor of Labour List. Look, Brian, I'll start with you on this one now. If people have absolute, complete and utter fatigue with this, and this deal just seems like it might be all right, OK, why not just wave it through and we all crack on?
Well, two reasons. First of all, it's not just about trade. It's actually about the acts of union, what forms the United Kingdom. And we need to see that the acts of union are restored so that citizens of Northern Ireland are equal to citizens in Wales, England and Scotland. And at the moment, they're not. Secondly, we know from history that these sort of deals that are, of course, sold and spun at the beginning, when you actually see the detail, and getting the detail can be difficult, you find they're not quite what they were first claimed. So you find that boats, fishing boats that leave Northern Ireland ports can leave the port, catch the fish, but then aren't allowed to actually land them back in the port they left from, but have to go across the sea to England to land them. There's these sort of technicalities that come up in law when you start to look at the details. So it's not about being Brexity, it's actually being about British. What does it mean for people in Northern Ireland to be British? Can they still do the same things that people in Fleetwood or Ayr or Wrexham can?
Well, just on that, I'll bring in Peter Edwards now, the former editor of Labour List. Peter, Brian's made a point there. It's about being British. It's about having integrity and principles. And quite a few people, I think, just maybe out of fatigue, would be happy for us to sell those Brexit sovereign principles down the river just to put pen to paper. Peter, your views?
Well, I think the most important things today are peace in Northern Ireland and economic prosperity in Northern Ireland. And I think that's why Labour are probably going to end up voting for this deal. I think it probably is a big step forward for the United Kingdom today. I have two slight worries. One is about the politicisation of the King meeting Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the EU Commission. And the other one, if it looks like Labour's going to back it and therefore it will go through the House of Commons, is whether essentially Rishi Sunak, like his predecessors, is going to end up in a big row with Tory backbenchers and a small coterie in the House of Commons controlling the fate of the whole United Kingdom in their hands. So I think it looks good, but we have to wait and see what happens next. We need a deal that's good for everyone.
Peter, are you saying now genuinely Rishi Sunak should ignore the hardcore Brexiteers in his own party?
Well, they always say politics is the art of the possible. I don't think it's about ignoring people, but if there's a majority in the House of Commons, which it looks like there'll be by quite a significant margin, you wouldn't want to see, for the sake of the peace in Northern Ireland, it being stuck for the sake of a few ideological folk on the backbenches.
Brian, a few ideological folk on the backbenches, some would argue the absolute core of the Conservative Party. Is Rishi Sunak absolutely in boiling hot water if he swerves their ideals in all of this?
I think he's in terrific difficulty because whilst I share some of Peter's concerns, such as the role of King Charles today, I think we have to remember that part of getting this deal and the impetus for trying to get it from Sunak's point of view was to bring Stormont back so that Stormont was sitting. And if the DUP find that they oppose this and that this deal is actually then put onto them, then the likelihood of Stormont sitting again is just not going to happen. So it is very complicated in the sense of just saying, well, you know, Labour can vote it through for the Conservatives. That's not going to be enough to solve the whole problem.
Look, both of you have actually raised an issue that I think is important. I'm going to ask you both to stay where you are, if that's all right, because I want to bring in Cameron Walker now, who's our royal reporter, and it is to talk about that issue that you were both talking about, which is the politicisation of King Charles. Cameron, what happened today, then? What are they going on about?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a pretty difficult couple of days for the King and Buckingham Palace, trying not to get dragged into this political controversy, which clearly many people feel has now happened. From Buckingham Palace's perspective, they are saying that they were acting on government advice today in terms of setting up this meeting between the King and Ursula von der Leyen. Now, Downing Street sources are essentially saying the opposite, but it was all down to the King and Buckingham Palace. So who exactly are we to believe? Now, we have had some guidance from various sources inside the palace. It's going to be a broad-ranging meeting. We can see pictures here of the King meeting Ursula von der Leyen. They're going to be discussing climate change, war in Ukraine, but clearly the big elephant in the room is this new Northern Ireland Brexit agreement, which is literally just happened hours before this meeting took place. There is some kind of precedent for this. In the 1970s, the Prime Minister, Sir Edward Heath, sent the late Queen on a state visit to Paris just as we had joined the European Economic Community. And that was still being thrashed out in the House of Commons at that time as well. So it's not... it has happened before. Something like this has happened before, but clearly it is very much contentious issue. The fact it's also being named the Windsor Agreement because it's some sort of a royal gloss, as it were. But in terms of the King and Buckingham Palace, they are very much saying they were acting on government advice, and clearly the King remains politically neutral because he is a constitutional monarch.
It's fascinating that neither party can even agree on exactly why that meeting has happened. Cameron, thank you. Peter, I'll bring you back in now. Peter Edwards is the former editor of Labour List. Why is it controversial for you that our King has been dragged into this?
Well, the cat is out of the bag. It was briefed going into the weekend that it was going to be called the Windsor Agreement. That then seemed to prompt another row between Downing Street and ex-ministers like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who said it's bordering on constitutional impropriety. He always puts everything in a very formal way. But we know it's happening in Windsor because the King's there. Why is the King there when they're doing a deal? To give it a political gloss. None of this is a coincidence. And the fact there was an... off-the-record briefing going into the weekend saying, hey, the King's hanging around, it would be nice to call it the Windsor Agreement. It's not the Wallasey or the Wolverhampton Agreement. I'm afraid someone has been a bit loose-lipped in Downing Street, then spent 72 hours trying to row back from that.
Yeah, Brian, I think he's still here, is he? Brian Monteith?
Yeah.
Who is... yes, he is. Well, I can hear him, at least, even if I can't see him. Brian, do you think it's an absolute disgrace that the King has been brought into this? Why are you so angry about it all?
I think it's absolutely shameful. It's not the Slough Agreement. The whole point is not to use this meeting to convince Ursula to change her mind or to concede another clause. This is to try and spin it, to sell it to the British public and to some extent the DUP. But it's shameful because the King's role is to give assent to acts of Parliament once bills have been passed. It's not to be part of this spin operation to get something through Parliament. So this is actually the Tory party playing constitutional politics and actually undermining the monarchy and the monarchy's role. And that's unforgivable in my book.
It's strong stuff from both of you. Look, thank you very much. I'm just going to give the final word on this to Cameron Walker, our royal reporter. Cameron?
Yeah, as Buckingham Palace said this morning, it's not uncommon for the King to meet a foreign leader if they are visiting the United Kingdom. But clearly there is a huge danger here of the King being seen to either endorse this deal or indeed at least give its blessing to it at the time where domestic political agreement hasn't actually taken place yet. We still got the DUP, other parliamentarians. The Prime Minister is expected to address Parliament a bit later on today. So it is highly controversial whichever way you spin it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, thank you very much. Great chat, that, guys. Thank you so much to everyone who took part in that. We had Brian Monteith, Peter Edwards, we had even a little bit of Tom Harwood, and, of course, we had the wonderful Cameron Walker as well. Right. As in case you couldn't tell, this is one of the more action-packed shows we've had to do. Non-stop breaking news. But coming up, you may have thought that we'd put this debate behind us, but the government's terror watchdog has now waded in and said that Shamima Begum should be allowed to return to the UK. What don't they understand, OK? People do not want someone like Shamima Begum back in Britain, especially in light of the fact that a chap who was supposed to be deported was on a plane, was dragged off it by the Human Rights Brigade. He went on to kill someone. Why are we playing roulette with public safety in this country? I'll be back in a tick.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Just after 5:30, let's bring you the latest news headlines this hour. And the Democratic Unionist Party says significant progress has been made on the Northern Ireland Protocol deal, but they say there are key issues of concern. The DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, says his party wants to study the detail of the agreement first and change parts of it with the government if required. The Prime Minister has described the deal as a decisive breakthrough. Rishi Sunak says it'll deliver smooth-flowing free trade across the UK while protecting Northern Ireland's sovereignty.
It's about showing that our union, that has lasted for centuries, can and will endure. And it's about breaking down the barriers between us, setting aside the arguments that for too long have divided us, and remembering that fellow feeling that defines us, this family of nations, this united kingdom.
Well, in other news today, CCTV footage has been released of a car used by the gunman who shot an off-duty officer in Omagh in County Tyrone. Senior Detective John Caldwell was shot multiple times at a sports complex last week. The force has appealed to anyone who may have seen the vehicle in the last 2 weeks leading up to the attack should get in touch. Crime Stoppers has, in fact, offered up to £20,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest. The energy regulator has reduced the cap on how much suppliers can charge customers, but bills are still expected to rise. Ofgem has announced the cap on the amount households pay for gas and electricity will drop by almost £1,000 from the 1st of April. However, customers are likely to pay 20% more on their annual bills, as the government's additional support only partially protects them. That means the average household will most likely pay around £500 more a year than they did before. The Labour leader says he wants to bring the UK back to being a rock of economic stability. Sir Keir Starmer used a speech in central London to set out his economic vision, saying Britain needs certainty but also change in order to achieve that goal. He said his real ambition was growth from the grassroots. You're up to date. I'm back at 6.
OK, ladies and gentlemen. Right, two similar-ish but slightly different, same but different stories here for you. The first one relates to Shamima Begum. The second one relates to a chap who was on a plane, about to be deported. The Human Rights Brigade get involved, and lo and behold, he's back out on the streets of Britain, stabs a man to death in some kind of drug-related incident. Shock, horror. But the Shamima one first. Shamima Begum's return to the UK had been put to bed for about half an hour, was it? But anyway, they revoked her citizenship and it was ruled lawful last week. But if you thought that was it, then you were wrong, because the government's terrorism watchdog has reportedly said that Begum and other women who joined the Islamic State terror group should be allowed home, because this is the position taken by key allies, including the United States. Well, Crimea River, the US does a load of stuff that we don't agree with as well. Joining me on the show now is Wazeek, who's a political commentator. Thank you very, very much. Great to have you back on the show. Why has our terror watchdog got involved in this? What makes them so special? A court has ruled.
Well, I'm not entirely sure why they're getting involved in this, because this is a legal matter, and the legality of why Shamima has had her citizenship revoked is because it was conducive to the public good, and the fact that is that she had citizenship by descent through her father, who currently resides in Bangladesh. Now, obviously, the terror watchdog are free to have their opinion, but at the end of the day, it is up to the Home Secretary to make the decision of what is best in the interests of the United Kingdom. And in Sajid Javid's view, who was the Home Secretary at the time, was to revoke her citizenship. And at the moment, the courts are siding with him that he's entitled to make that decision.
But can you understand? I mean, shortly we're going to be talking about a guy who had a criminal past, was set for deportation. A load of do-gooders got involved and said, oh, it's just like the Windrush thing again. In fact, that it isn't. He's allowed back on the streets of Britain to kill, OK? Why are people so desperate for Britain to take back in and welcome with open arms absolute wrongers like Shamima Begum?
Well, I honestly don't know, Patrick. It seems mind-boggling, to be quite honest. When we think about those who we are repatriating or those who we are preventing from coming into the United Kingdom, we do that based on the risk. And it seems that some of these so-called do-gooders who are banding around human rights abuses and or accusations that Britain is complicit in that are putting the British public at risk, because they're not assessing these people based on the risk that they pose and information that they're not party to. Now, we have to remember, when Sajid Javid revoked the citizenship of Shamima Begum, he done it based on information that we do not know. And what he clearly stated was that if we were aware of that information, we would be siding with him. And the fact that these human rights groups are not doing that and not sharing that view is quite troubling.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the Human Rights Brigade in my sights very, very shortly. But when I look at the independent terrorism watchdog telling us that we should welcome Shamima Begum back, a girl who, as we understand it, was, you know, sewing suicide bombers into their vests in a way that they couldn't get out of without detonating. I mean, the amount of blood, allegedly, on this particular individual's hands is monstrous. You've got the independent terror watchdog telling us that we should welcome this person back. We also had incidents recently with Prevent, where they were facing strong accusations of giving taxpayer-funded money to groups that supported the Taliban and were doing, potentially, in that regard anyway, more to actually not prevent terrorism, basically. I mean, literally not living up to their name. It leads me to conclude that maybe some of these groups who we task with keeping us safe are doing the exact opposite.
Well, it certainly seems that way. I mean, the Prevent example that you just gave is a prime reason why we need to actually prevent some of these people from coming back. The fact that government money or taxpayer money was being given to groups who were then going on to promote extremism just shows how much of a mess that we're currently in terms of protecting our own people in the name of human rights. What about the human rights of our own citizens and actually keeping them safe from Islamist extremists? And, I think we really need to recalibrate our priorities, and it doesn't seem like that's the case.
Yeah, indeed. Look, Wazeek, thank you very, very much. Always an absolute pleasure. Political commentator Wazeek, and he makes a good point there, a series of good points, that we should be protecting our citizens from Islamist terrorism. But frankly, what about people who just shouldn't be here? So either people who come here illegally with a criminal past or people we've actually tried to deport. Cop a load of this story that I'm going to be giving to you next. There was an individual who was deemed to be deported to Jamaica on a plane. The human rights lawyers get involved, and then lo and behold, he's wheeled off the plane and he's back in Britain. Well, he never left. He's in Britain, and then he can go on and kill someone, stab them to death in a drug-related crime. You know who tried to keep him in this country successfully? A string of Labour MPs, Lib Dem MPs and celebrities as well. I will be naming and shaming some of those people very, very shortly. Loads more to come, including that. Can you believe, although you possibly can believe, actually, that an individual set for deportation, the woke brigade keep him in this country, and there we go, he goes on to kill. Should there be mass public apologies to the nation as a result of this? I'll see you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, now it's been revealed that a convicted criminal who avoided deportation on a Home Office charter flight to Jamaica, thanks to a series of legal challenges, high-profile people from political parties, which include, by the way, David Lammy, Diane Ampert, Jeremy Corbyn, Dawn Butler, Sir Keir Starmer, Ed Davey, all getting involved, he went on to commit murder. Ernesto Elliott was involved in a horrific knife fight over drugs, but only 6 months prior, he was backed by celebrities and MPs, some of whom I've mentioned there, to avoid deportation. Well, Chris Philp, who was an immigration minister in 2020 and tried to deport this particular individual, has told Labour MPs and virtue-signalling celebrities to think again over cases like this. Let's talk now to Harjap Singh Bangal, who's a UK immigration lawyer. Harjap, thank you very much. Now, issues took place when it came to the Windrush scandal, and that was a genuine scandal. But are we witnessing here a load of do-gooding, virtue-signalling MPs and celebrities using that to actually allow a murderer to stay in Britain?
I think ultimately it rests with the Home Office, doesn't it? If people like Chris Philp are saying that somebody can sign a petition and can stop them deporting anyone, it really goes down to our laws and says, well, perhaps he's not the right person or these people aren't the right people for the job. We've got to remember that our deportation game was very strong in the 2000s. We were sending back up 60,000 people a year. Yeah. That has now, under the current government, whittled down every year. To 2015, it was 5,500, and now it's even less than 3,000. It's around about 2,000. So it's been whittled down while this government's been in charge. And before, deportations were happening, despite the fact that we have a Human Rights Act, which has been around since the year 2000. Yeah. And despite the fact that we've got lawyers and politicians who have been around for ages.
Could you just explain to me, from a legal setting anyway, how a flight of 50 people, 23 of whom were known to be serious criminals, can be blocked from taking off because the implication is, well, that might be racist? I just do not understand. One of them goes on to commit a knife-related, drug-related murder in this country. I mean, what could be the legal standpoint? If we can't deport this lot, who can we deport?
Yeah, I mean, it was a joint flight, so it wasn't an individual being sent back. And a lot of them, people on there, did have British children or had British spouses. And so it was a mixture. Whereas if the Home Office had tried to deport them individually, as they can do and as they have done in the past, they probably would have had better joy. But because they were trying to do it all in one go, you know, sort of clandestinely and trying to just shove them all on one flight and send them all together, it sort of lumped everyone in the same category. And then some people appealed from that, saying, well, hold on, I'm not as bad as this guy. Why am I being treated the same? Or my situation is totally different from this guy who's convicted of a murder or a rape or whatever. Why am I being treated the same? And hence the flight was stayed. Whereas perhaps what they should have done was try to send them back one by one according to the circumstances.
Yeah, and just quickly, would you urge do-gooding woke celebrities to maybe just take a step back in future from trying to jump on a bandwagon of deportation flights? Because actually, sometimes the people on those flights will go on to murder people on the streets of Britain.
Well, I would urge anyone who's trying to protect criminals not to do so. The first thing you want to do is when you look at a criminal, it's like, well, what if it happened to my family? That's always say, right, what if that was my brother who'd got murdered or, you know, my daughter had got raped? How would I feel about that? And then would I campaign for that person's release or would I want them not detained? And once you put yourself in that shoes, it's very hard to defend blatant criminal activity like rape, like murder. And you got to remember that this was a country where we used to send our own people to Australia who'd committed the same crime. So we shouldn't have a tolerance for crime per se. And anyone who is advocating for criminals should be rehabilitated by all means. But if they're beyond that, then perhaps they should be kept away or they should be kept detained or kept away from normal society.
Yeah, look, Harjab, thank you very much. Harjab Singh Bangal there, UK immigration lawyer, just reacting to that story that, yep, there was a chap who was on a deportation flight, ready to go, and lo and behold, the woke brigade get involved. And for the sake of virtue signalling, the likes of David Lammy here, who signed this thing, Jeremy Corbyn, and a host of celebrities as well, for the sake of virtue signalling, what has come about of it now? You've got an individual who has died as a result of this chap still being in the United Kingdom. Well, there we go. Well, I can see that Michelle Dewberry is sitting next to me very patiently, but I think she's going to have to hold on for 1 second before I go through about what's coming up on her show, if she'll tell me, that's to say, because finally, Sir Ian Fleming's James Bond novels are the latest to be edited by sensitivity readers, which is Orwellian, to say the least. Following a review commissioned by Ian Fleming Publications Limited, several racial references to black people have either been reworked or removed altogether, and the new issues will be accompanied by a disclaimer warning readers that the books were written at a time when terms and attitudes which might be considered offensive by modern viewers were commonplace. There's also, of course, the staunch undercurrents of, as some would say it, misogyny in the James Bond, the whole thing, really. Anyway, let's talk to the host of Really 007 podcast. It's Thomas Pickup. Thank you very much. Thomas, great to have you on the show. Look, what's going on here? I mean, is this just the woke brigade, yes, again, getting involved in something that doesn't need to be touched?
I don't know whether it's something so political like that. I do know that certain things probably did have to change. Like there's a title of a chapter on Live and Let Die, which uses an extremely offensive word that certainly wouldn't be published today. But we have to look at them and think these were historical fiction novels that were written in the time. You know, people will have to accept that there will be things that now certain people find unacceptable. Certainly some of the language Fleming used, I think everyone would find unacceptable. But we don't want it to be the slippery slope to editing every single historical fiction or non-fiction document that includes things we don't like. You know, I'd have something like a disclaimer at the start. They sometimes have that in films, you know. This doesn't necessarily reflect our attitudes now. And when a teacher's teaching things, you know, like novels that, you know, Agatha Christie had to change the title of one novel, which was correct. But that was in her lifetime. But I think it's better to have it there as it is, and then a teacher, for instance, and readers can just read up about it and educate themselves about the concept and how things have improved.
I get any reference to overt racism and stuff like that. Obviously, yeah, there's no need for anyone to be seeing anything like that. What about phrases like blithering woman?
Yeah, well, I personally wouldn't have changed that. I don't know quite the context and the reason for that. I do know that I've heard that certain homophobic elements have remained. So there seems to be a pick and choose attitude of what's happened. But I think it would be good to sort of hear from the Ian Fleming Foundation. It's the 70th anniversary of the book's being released. So I'm sure we quite enjoy the press talking about it. And I'm sure a few books will fly off the shelves.
Yeah, fingers crossed. But also just to, I think, really drill down in how stupid it is. I mean, James Bond as a character is, some would argue, a cold-blooded killer who, of course, is doing the national interest and all this stuff. I mean, it's also fictional. I know that Fleming obviously based things on certain real events, but it's fictional, right? So you've got a fictional, cold-blooded killing spy here who's on duty for Queen of... I mean, I'm sorry, but that can't be woke.
Well, he's not a great role model, is he? You know, he has character flaws. It's not like everyone's going around saying, this is your ideal fellow you should be. Of course, when we see the films, we see Sean Connery, Roger Moore and everybody, we're like, I want to be that guy. But it's in a knowing way. We know we can't act like that necessarily in real life. And he's doing it in the line of duty. You know, there's occasional things that he does do wrong, but we're all human, we're all flawed. And James Bond, Ian Fleming wrote James Bond as a flawed hero, I suppose. And we've got to accept that. And the films, you know, a lot of them look outdated now, but they're actually a bit more progressive than people give them credit for. I don't think we should bash them as much as we should.
I don't, and in fact, I quite enjoy watching them. I mean, I must say, I do find it absolutely hilarious. There's that man talk clip, of course, which is just quite funny, right? It is quite funny in my opinion. I'm going to... It's of its time. I'm going to read you a little statement now, and this is from Ian Fleming Publications Limited. We at Ian Fleming Publications reviewed the text of the original books and decided our best course of action was to follow Ian's lead. We've made changes to Live and Let Die, that he himself authorised following Ian's approach, we looked at the instances of several racial terms across the books and removed a number of individual words, or else swapped them for terms that were more accepted today, but in keeping of the period in which the books were written. We encourage people to read the books for themselves when the new paperbacks are published in April. So, yes, I'll bring you back in now, because, yes, there's clearly quite a shrewd marketing tool, some would say, is to re-bring it to our attention. But I'm concerned, though, that characters like James Bond, who's a macho man, you know, puts it about a little bit, a man's man, some would say, hard-drinking, flawed, you just couldn't write about these days, and we're going to end up with big, fluffy non-entities, and that's all we're going to end up reading about.
Well, we've got to have the original editions. They've got to stay, even if they sort of edit these out and change them completely. And I don't think this is doing it too much. But say it got worse and they completely changed all the language, we've got to have those originals, and we've got to make sure that those are around, and those are the ones that are discussed, particularly things in classrooms. I'd love to have learned Ian Fleming in the classroom as a kid, but other books that contain offensive language should stay the same, and teachers should teach that you can't say that anymore, but this is the historical context of them.
Exactly. Look, thank you very much, Thomas. Keep up the good work. Thomas Pickup there, the host of the Really 007 podcast, reacting to the fact that James Bond, of all people, is potentially about to be censored. I can't help but wonder what James Bond would have said about that. Joining me now is Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. How are you?
Hello. Well, I'm all right, but I am a little bit offended by the James Bond thing.
Why?
I don't think the changes go far enough, Patrick.
Right.
I, for one, will not be happy until James Bond has been rewritten, recast as a black, lesbian, trans woman in a wheelchair. Only then will I be happy.
Yeah. And, that is a hill you're willing to die on, isn't it, actually,
I
Michelle?
probably won't go that far. I'm not going to die on that hill.
No.
But I just think, you know, if you want to be progressive and forward-thinking...
Go the whole hog.
Go the whole hog.
Would it be a rainbow-coloured wheelchair?
Why not?
It'd have to be, wouldn't it?
That is a good idea.
We've only got 10 seconds. Are you going to tell me what's...
You're better at it than me.
Are you going to tell me what's coming up or not?
No, you've got to
All right.
watch. You've got to watch. But apart from the big issues of the day, which of course I'll get into, I also want to talk rubbish and bins. And the fact that you've got to get an appointment these days, ladies and gents, to even go to a tip. What's going on?
Well, there you go. I've been talking rubbish for the last 3 hours, and that's more than enough from me. I'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Take it easy.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.